OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
A very good morning to you. Welcome along this Tuesday morning to OTB AM. It's Gilroy and Eoin Sheahan with you all the way through until 10. If you want to get in touch, you can WhatsApp us 0879 180 180, or of course you can use the hashtag OTBAM on Twitter. We stream live on Facebook, we stream live on YouTube, but the best place to get us is of course on the OTB Sports app, which you can download for nothing in either of the app stores, depending on whether or not you're on iPhone or indeed Android. And a reminder, of course, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We've got a brilliant show, a busy show lined up for you. Michael Verney is going to talk to us about the latest GAA stories, including the situation in Donegal, where a team member from Kilcar has apparently tested positive for COVID, but the game is still scheduled to go ahead, so we'll try and get to the bottom of what's going on there. Phil Egan's going to come along and talk to us about deal or no deal and Manchester City's central defensive partnership last night. We will be talking about Manchester United too, because Daniel Harris is with us after a pretty poor start to the season for them. And Matt Williams is going to try and put some explanation around the failure of Leinster at the weekend. And to set the table for that, here is some of Monday Night Rugby, which had Liam Toland and Stuart Barnes with a fairly chilling take on what is happening at Leinster at the moment. Have a look.
Now, welcome along. Much to discuss. If you haven't seen the news, by the way, the remaining dates for the postponed Women's Six Nations have been confirmed this afternoon. So Ireland-Italy is October 25th. That's going to be in Donnybrook, 1 o'clock kickoff. And then the French game away, that's going to be over in Lille. That'll be November the 1st, 1:30 Irish time. Those dates released this afternoon. Before all that, of course, Heineken Champions Cup semi-finals will take place next Saturday. Racing will host Saracens. That will be on at La Défense. And then Exeter have Toulouse at Sandy Park. No Irish representation, of course. Only the fourth time since the turn of the century that has been the case. We have with us Liam Toland. I almost called you Liam Farrell there. He's on the brain. Good evening, Liam.
How are you doing, Joe?
Very well. And Stuart Barnes, hello to you.
Good evening.
So spooked was the word that Leo Cullen used several times over, Liam Toland, about Leinster's first half.
Well, I think if you kind of frame that 40 minutes of rugby and you look at what Leinster achieved in the previous few weeks against Munster and Ulster, they were able to control tempo, they were able to control the corridor power. And in certain cases, even when they weren't controlling the set piece, they could control the outcome of those errors. But for me, I know he didn't get man of the match, but Maro Itoje in the second row for Saracens was just phenomenal. Like, he controlled everything. He was the breathing heart of what Saracens brought. And in many ways, like, Saracens is full of, like, there's 6, 7, 8, 9 starting test lines players are certainly approaching that. And the Saracens are a very good outfit, but their mean average as a team isn't something that should frighten Leinster. But their control of tempo and their corridor power was absolutely frightening, and Itoje was just ruthless. And then you factor in the set piece, and it really brings back the value of the scrum to rugby, doesn't it? And it brings back questions around the role of the back row at scrum time. The Leinster back row were more concerned about the potential of Vinopola picking for 8, and as a former wing forward is quite a worry when you're on the side. But you got to scrum first, and I think the Leinster front row really struggled. And I think if Tadhg Furlan had been playing, that the 7 penalties conceded may have been different. That said, that 40 minutes was certainly, I didn't quite see it coming. But if you took Itoje out and you put Furlan in, maybe it'd have been slightly different. But it was a brutal 40 minutes from them.
Yeah, 7 scrum penalties conceded. I mean, not since the World Cup final really have we been so focused, I think, on the influence of the scrum in a game. That's a very interesting point you make about the role of the back row on Leinster's part, Liam, because there's been so much talk, understandably, of Vincent Koch and Mako Vunipola. Surely, though, somewhere in the midst of that first half, if the back row were abandoning ship with good cause to peel off early, surely at some stage when they realised there was a full-blown crisis in the scrum, they would have bedded down, no?
Well, you think back to Northampton in the final in 2011, and Mike Ross was relatively young international at that stage. but he was 31 years of age as a tight head. And Porter obviously has a Grand Slam and many accolades, but he's still very much learning as a tight head. You know, he's relatively young in his career, that, and minutes playing as a tight head is relatively low. Like he wasn't a starter, an automatic starter last year for obvious reasons, Tyke Furlong, and at times he was on the bench. And he got bit parts at the end. So there's a couple of things that need to be looked at in a way. At halftime in the Northampton final, there was a real scrummaging brains trust led by Mike Ross, and the computer nerds were able to see what was going wrong and they were able to fix it. I'm not so sure that Leinster scrum, because that has been conceding penalties against Ulster and Munster in the last few weeks as well. So it isn't the perfect end product. But as a back rower, when you're scrummaging, particularly in the opposition's put in, particularly when you got someone like a Vinopola, you got to be very conscious of what he's doing. But the first way to disrupt him is to disrupt the Saracens' scrum, and that requires you scrummaging. And that requires James Ryan as a tight head scrummaging, and the whole unit of 8. And that's why it's such a beautiful part of our game. It requires 8 players working in unison for about 20 seconds to get it all right. And if you don't get it right, it brings the referee's interpretation into question. And certainly Andrew Porter, when he's playing for Ireland or he's playing for Leinster, there's an awful lot of interpretation. And sometimes the penalties go in his favour, and sometimes they go against him. So there's a combination of stuff. But certainly Connor's at 7 and Doris at 6. You could argue in their career to this point, which has been on an unbelievable trajectory, they have never really had to scrummage as a back row. Maybe in their career, I don't know. I haven't gone back into the vaults. But it could be the first time where their scrum was really under pressure, and they also had a number 8 of Vinopola's calibre to worry about. Not just him, but then they have to be focused on the Saracens 10 and 12 and 13, so what might come down their channel as well. So there's an awful lot happening there. So I forgive Connors, but it could be an insight into schools rugby. I don't know about you, Stuart, but schools rugby in Ireland, there's no real scrummaging going on. It's a 1 metre push. So there's a depowering of that whole concept. And a lot of top-class players might find themselves in a quarterfinal of champions at European level, having never really scrummaged. And it's a brutal place to learn it.
Yeah, there's no doubt at all. It was very reminiscent of November the 2nd, Yokohama, except from an English perspective. It would be perceived as a rather good 80 minutes. Vincent Cott was the link between it all. He was magnificent. As you say, Liam, Toje was at the heartbeat of it. But I think also it was a tactical triumph for Saracens. Yes, it appears that they missed their F a lot less than Leinster missed theirs, Furlong and Farrell. But one has to say, you know, geez, I was playing this game a long time ago, but if your scrum is going down and you're getting repeatedly penalised, the other thing you have to do is reassess how you're trying to play the game. Now, to me, I saw a Leinster team that were playing quite similar rugby to how England were playing in the very early days of Stuart Lancaster. When I was commentating for Sky, I used to bemoan the fact that they were going sideways, left, right, nowhere forward between the 10-metre line and the halfway line. And they would inevitably, against powerful teams, leak penalties. You leak penalties in your own half, you're liable to leak points. Now, at some stage, I'm disappointed, as well as the points Liam made, which I agree with totally, about the set piece. Tactically, I feel that Leinster, in the shape of Sexton in particular, had to say, hey, we're conceding penalties or potentially conceding them every time we get into a scrum. So, you know, it's not what we want to do, but we have to play this ball in parts of the field where the net result of a penalty ain't going to be 3 points against us, because in a big, tight European match, if you're just going leaking 3, 6, 9, it's taking you away from the game and it's putting you under pressure. Had Leinster played less rugby in the first half, but they'd been 3-6 down, it could have been a very, very different story, especially with the fact that Saracens had very limited options on the bench in the last 20, but they left themselves a long way to go. So I would also say Mark McCall macro-managed Saracens They went in there knowing what they had to do in the broadest sense, and then were told to play the game. We scrum, we hit at the gain line, defence and attack, we box kick, we play them into parts of the field they don't want to be. Leinster, I felt that if there's a weakness in Stuart Lancaster, he sometimes micromanages. He used to say with England, you know, I work so hard on the players thinking for themselves, but they're not getting it. That's because if you coach in a certain way where there is so much in the way of sort of phase rugby, then it's very hard for players to actually divorce themselves from that micromanagement. And I felt that Leinster suffered in an English sort of way. And I felt that Johnny Sexton played very much like a lot of English fly-halves were doing in the early Lancaster era.
Stuart, you've raised a number of points there which fall firmly into a theme, I think, which has arisen across these various Anglo-Irish games, Ireland against England and Leinster against Saracens. Yeah. When you use phrases like too much rugby in the wrong places and then players not thinking on their feet, I mean, immediately I'm brought back to Dublin 2019, and
yes,
it does not seem, for whatever reason, as if Irish teams, be that Leinster or Ireland against England or Saracens, are learning how to cope and think on their feet in these circumstances.
Well, again, who was Ireland coach 2019? Joe Schmidt, a man for whom I have a huge regard, but a man who I think by the end of his tenure in Ireland was over-coaching. And I think that's a potential weakness of Stuart Lancaster. I feel that sometimes Leinster look like Ireland, but with more fluidity and more confidence and more flair. But essentially, they look a patterned sort of team. And that is a big problem, I think, for Ireland. The other major problem that, again, you know, let's link club and country, Leinster and Ireland. I remember Joe saying after that 2019 loss, he looked shell-shocked and he said, you got to remember, England are full of big men. We can't match that. And he was talking about the Vunipola brothers. He was talking about Jamie George. He was talking about Maro Itoje. England is a country with a very large population, and it's got a lot of big blokes. And with Ireland, with Wales, with Scotland, you know, it seems that sometimes at the very highest level, without that power, it's very hard to win. You have your moments, but it's difficult to dominate. And South Africa, who aren't a pretty team, they take that power level to the World Cup, and they've got an amazing record. And I would say, you know, watching my money go down the drain for the last 4 days, there's a parallel in golf with Bryson DeChambeau. He hit the ball so hard, the others weren't ready for it, and they couldn't adapt to just the sheer power. Now, golf correspondents and commentators are talking about a new era of golf. I wouldn't go that far. I don't know enough about golf. But again, it gets back to this thing about professionalism. Power is a potent factor. And Saracens, like England, possessed it. And Ireland, every now and again, look as if they're playing on the back foot without it.
Liam, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, and I think to even add on top of that, Joe, you've got like the try that Alex Good scored in the first half. I thought it was one of the best tries I've seen. Like, Leinster didn't miss a tackle. So the sense that I got when Saracens scored that try was that they laid a trap, building on what Stuart is saying there, that they dominated the corridor of power, they dominated the tempo, and they dominated set piece. Ironically, by the way, if you look at the stats, both scrums were 100%, so Leinster had 100% scrum success at 4 out of 4, yet conceded 7 penalties, so I'm not sure how the statistician gets around that. But they have then the quality of players aside. I think Elliot Daly, I've always been an enormous fan at 15. Like, I wasn't aware of his outrageous kicking. We all had seen it, but the accuracy and just punishing, the emotional energy that takes from you as a home side, particularly when you've no crowd to kind of reboost you, it's enormous. Like, these moments are enormous, and that sense of physicality is something that we have to think our way around. Now, from time to time, the likes of Japan, and you know, we were in Japan for the World Cup. Like, a nation like Japan have taught us that skills can at times beat power. Not all the time, and certainly not if you have to patch 5 or 6 games together. I think there's huge lessons there. But for me, the last number of weeks, the Guinness Pro, Leinster were playing against 2 poorer sides in Munster and Ulster, and you obviously got the Stade Toulouse game to talk about, but two poorer sides, and they didn't do a whole lot in order to manage those hurdles. They just simply soaked up the hits, and they used, leading with Josh van der Fleer, who was just in Billy Byrne's face and just shutting down time and that. This was the first time, and I'd be slow to think that Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster were caught unawares by Saracens, but maybe the preparation through the Guinness Pro gave them a sense of comfort that we can manage and we can adapt our rugby, because the rugby intelligence of the Leinster 15 is still, and I take Stuart's point about Sexton at 10 and changing the style of game that was required in the first half. But the rugby intelligence at Leinster squad is still phenomenal. Maybe it is a time that it just goes to show, like, you look at James Ryan, who's a relatively young, he's our hero, isn't he? But he was just blitzed by Maro Itoje, just physically, the power sense. So maybe it is a time again that we need to kind of figure out, how do we drift away from the power game into something like Japan have taught us, a game that can actually get better outcomes, because every time we play against this type of power, we're coming out with the same result.
The only thing is, we've been having that conversation since about November 2019, and here we are. It doesn't look like we've massively moved on in that direction, or even, Liam, like they had something to go to. I mean, you accept Stuart's point that the power game was dominating, and Leinster, in an Ireland-esque way, sort of ran out of ideas in that first half. We'll get on to the second half in a moment, but they shouldn't have let the scoreboard get to where it got to.
100%. Like, again, it's very, very debilitating when your scrum goes. But the scrum has consistently not been perfect. The line out in the last couple of weeks has not been perfect from a Leinster point of view. But I'd also kind of tip my eye. I'd be interested to see what Stuart thinks of Jordan Larmour's performance at 15, because, again, Larmour's instinct typically, and his value add, is when you kick a loose ball to him. And I think Wigglesworth, to be fair, there was precious few loose balls kicked. But his kind of instinct is to really punish you when the ball comes his way. And for some reason, maybe the entire squad were caught in the headlights of what Saracens were doing in that 40 minutes. But there was precious little natural flow back from Leinster. I'm not quite sure why Larmour didn't lead that way, but certainly his instinct was more conservative than it would have been in other games. And I don't know why that's the case. I'd be interested to see what Stuart would think of that.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Larmour, but I think when you're part of a back three and the pressure is being applied, as it was by Richard Wigglesworth, it actually gets quite daunting. For my sins, I was a fly half come fullback, and I can recall Eric Elwood having an amazing game with a boot in 1993. And, my game as a fullback was very much on the counter, and you just think, Christ, they're kicking well at us, and it intimidates you, I think. And I think there's that element to it. And I also think with Larmour, I think low's very important to Leinster, because Leinster they play some lovely rugby against possibly physically weaker teams, but there's a pattern and a structure to their game. And Lowe has this capacity. He's a player who just plays outside that pattern. He can burst it and change it. And that's important for you, because it's a talismanic quality that you believe that you can do all sorts of different things you're actually not doing. And he was having quite a hard time of it. And I felt that I loved the way Saracens, via Wigglesworth and Alex Lewington, targeted one of the most important broken field players in the Leinster game and made him look very ragged. And I just felt that it spread thereon from quite early in the game, and Larmour's a very fine player. His kicking game is improving. I just felt he got caught up in a game where Saracens were psychologically as well as physically squeezing Leinster.
And it didn't help as well that when Leinster did put a bit of width on their game, like the turnovers conceded were huge. I think it was like almost double figures, over double figures. I think 16-7 or something in Saracens' favour. So any time that ball was in any shape or form had ambition on it, it seemed that Saracens were able to eke out a positive result on their half there as well. So it seemed that not only was the set piece being punished, but any form of creativity that was of the games we saw at the weekend, the total metres gained by Leinster Saracens was the smallest of all the sides. So it was a very limited game that both Saracens and Leinster played.
Yeah.
But it just so happened that it suited Saracens absolutely 100%. And they had that spark to score that try when they needed it. But ultimately, they weren't here to do that. They were here just to beat Leinster up.
Yeah, the ball was only in play for 30 minutes. Stuart, can you give us maybe the outsider's perspective on this? Because it feels like something of a reality check for the Pro 14 and for Leinster. I mean, to be slightly unfair to them, but if we just kind of hone in, they were beaten in Newcastle in the final of Europe last year.
In a very similar, what Liam was saying about a lack of metres made and quite a battling game. That final was very similar to the semi-final with Saracens dominating. Sorry, yes.
And then they go and they win 25 matches, and they are very much on the front foot. And there's Pro 14 cannon fodder, and we have debates here on Irish Radio. Geez, I wonder, are Leinster's second string the second best team in this competition? And we celebrate Josh van der Fleer's had 1 billion tackles this week, and there's various stats, and they all look very good. And then when push comes to shove again, a crucial moment, there's been no real progress, and they are soundly beaten here. And so much of the last year's Pro 14 rugby has gone from, arguably, and this is the point that I'm putting to you, has gone from being, something of a celebration of Leinster, and actually, it's just it just speaks of the Pro 14's weakness and maybe a level of delusion here.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a little bit like National Hunt. Couple of small yards in England have a horse that rattles off 4 or 5 big hurdles, wins, and they look great, and they go to Cheltenham, and then it's Ireland has all the big guns. Form line's very important. I was interested in what Liam was saying earlier about the Ulster performance. I felt Toulouse, you've got to remember, it only played 2 matches this season since lockdown. They're going to be rusty. I felt they beat Ulster with more comfort than Leinster did, and I think that's a reflection on the form lines. I think it has not helped Leinster winning all their games. And I think I was looking at the score lines. It was something like a 21-point margin average. This is huge. This is not the sort of background preparation you need to play big teams. And I'm not an Anglo-centric sort of person who likes to kick Pro 14. I love rugby. I want to see it good everywhere I see. But what I've seen is over the last over years, a lack of ambition and accuracy in the English League, in Ireland, in Pro 14, more flair, but a lot less power. What's quite interesting, since lockdown, 4 or 5 English teams have actually looked quite good. And, I'll include Exeter alongside Saracens with my old lot, Bath and Wasps and Bristol. And because they have this power, because they have this size, when they get that right, they become quite a hard team to beat. And I go all the way back to Liam, say, well, what do we do about that? And say how Japan showed the way. Japan's way was to play with great accuracy, but at real pace. Now, if you look at Ireland, there isn't real pace. And in the World Cup, there was no pace. They played offloading, but it was slow as you like, and it was hopeless. And you take the power analogy, the one team who are not huge at international level are New Zealand. And how have they, in the 20-odd years of professionalism, dominated test match after test match as they do? Because the speed and the accuracy and the width of their game is like nothing else from any team. And South Africa can rein them back in World Cup finals, yes, but overall, New Zealand, look at their rugby, the Super New Zealand tournament, Aotearoa, sorry, it had left me for a second. It was played at a completely different pace to anything in the Northern Hemisphere. And that reflects on why New Zealand are a hard team to beat. They don't have the biggest, but they understand if you don't have that, you have to play outside power. Ireland can't do that because Ireland don't have the pace or the willingness to play outside power.
Yeah. So chastening, to say the least. And, well, look, a very brief, because I do want to touch on Ulster before I let you go, word on what Saracens did, Liam, because, I mean, it was kind of vintage knockout rugby. Even if for people who didn't catch the game as it unfolded, there was an exchange of penalties early, and then 9 minutes, Saracens go 6-3 up, 13 minutes, they go 9-3 up, 25 minutes, 12-3 up, 28 minutes, suddenly they're 15-3 up, and Leinster are walking a bit of a high wire act, and then bang, the good try, it's 22-3 at half-time, basically game over. I mean, it was utterly vintage. It
was, and as I was sitting there, obviously we've discussed, key moments like the scrum and the back row, and that the influence it had in not supporting maybe the Leinster front five. Maybe Scott Farley's absence was a small hindrance. Maybe the penalties around the breakdown, the turnovers were huge. But the attitude of what Saracens did, I was beginning to say to myself, if this was a normal season, Leinster would have navigated the Guinness Pro, but they would have had sprinkled in on top of it the European games. So the semi-final and the final and the pool stages, there's not a huge gap. And there was a massive gap between this high-end game and the next most appropriate high-end game, in a sense. And that game, for me, that in this season seemed to kind of prepare Leinster poorly, if that makes any sense. It sounds like an excuse, but it is a kind of, COVID has a reality to it. Now, you could easily say, well, hang on, Saracens, sure, what were they doing? They had less. But we knew that they had a power game. They were out of their domestic championship for all the reasons we're aware of, and this was huge. And I just felt that Atoje, if for those who haven't seen the game, just watch the game, just watch him. Like, he's a freak. Like, he's a wing forward. He's like having a Trevor Brennan and putting about 2 stone on him and giving him the skill set to play any position he wants to play. And he's just relentless. He's massive. Like, some of the stuff he did was just off the charts, and he led the way. And I haven't even mentioned the Saracens tight head, but I just think that possibly Leinster not having had a European game before this one, and the reality is they were playing, and they played okay to beat Munster and Ulster and that, but that was poor running for them. And I think it was a massive lesson, and I think they'd be very disappointed in how they allowed a power game to dominate them, because they know that game is there. So I think they'll be really disappointed.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That said, they had preparation for last year's final, and, here we are suddenly again. It feels very similar.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Dad Pod.
This is a video thing as well.
Does have a name?
Podcast.
Midlife crisis.
Paddy Daddy.
Midlife crisis.
Dadcast.
That's not bad, actually,
Dadcast with Cadbury Freddo Treasures. Tuesdays from 3 p.m. on OTB Sports Radio. Tune in on the OTB Sports app.
The all-new OTB Sports app. It's all videos, sports news, live scores, interviews, podcasts, all waiting for you. Search OTB Sports on your app store and download now.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
Very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM. For those of you who've been with us from 7:30, you're great. But those of you who've just downloaded the podcast, well, did you know we start at 7:30 every morning? There's a bit of breaking news for you. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Eoin, Sheahan, good morning to you. How are you?
Very well. How are things?
What's going on?
Not much now. Really, not much. What's going on there?
I mean, there's loads going on. What are you talking about? Massive football stories emerging from yesterday. Further amazing sport to look forward to at the weekend. You're selling the next 2 hours of the show and you're like, I don't know.
It's just, we're in this constant state of everything happening at the moment, What's out of the ordinary now? I'm used to the sport being back. I'm used to
we had 6 months
of being busy again.
We had 6 months of nothing happening, and now everything's happening. You're like, no, I don't like this either.
Back in the flow of it immediately. Whatever is normal is not good, is what I say.
You don't like any form of change. You didn't like the change that brought us to nothing, and then you got used to the nothing, and now that the nothing is over, you don't like that change.
No, I don't. No, it's actually the opposite of that entirely. I love the change, and then when I get settled into the change, I hate the normality of it all. So that is actually what I'm talking about here.
Okay. Wolves last night? Man City? Aston Villa? John Egan?
Yeah, this is obviously your opportunity to talk about how Aston Villa are in a 100% record and are going to crush all comers this year, and how Sheffield United actually are not going to be the force they were last season. I think that was pretty evident from the early game last night. John Egan, by the way, getting a fairly ludicrous red card.
Wasn't that ludicrous? Wasn't that ludicrous?
I think so.
Why?
I don't think there is concrete evidence that he is denied a clear goal-scoring opportunity.
I mean, man running through one-on-one with the ball over the top. Goalkeeper quite slow to come out. Goalkeeper very quick to come out after man gets pulled back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that ludicrous.
I think if the player is in control of the ball, it's a red card. This whole prospective goal-scoring opportunity thing, I'm not a fan of. I think that the goal-scoring opportunity needs to exist for the goal-scoring opportunity to then be chalked off. Now, I guess defenders are getting smarter about it. We saw it with Andreas Christensen on Sunday, and we saw it with John Egan yesterday. Now, I thought the Christensen thing was a bit more of a stonewaller than this particular case. But, yeah, maybe it's just the defenders getting smarter.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I thought that it wasn't that ridiculous. I did feel like when you don't get the double sending off you don't get the double jeopardy of the red card and the penalty. Obviously, Emiliano Martinez, best penalty goalkeeper in the world at the moment, so it's not really a penalty when Villa can see the penalty, which is something that they're going to... If I was them, I'd be like shit-kicking in the penalty area for the rest of the season, safe in the knowledge that you have a goalkeeper who's going to save it every time. What about Manchester City? Are they back?
A lot of people seem to think they are. There's kind of two ways of looking at this. First of all, they were put under a hell of a lot of pressure in that second half. I think we have a lot of conclusions being drawn, not only from a very small sample size early this season, we have a lot of conclusions being drawn at half-time at the moment. It seems to be a habit where, Spurs are crap, but I've only watched 45 minutes of them playing against Southampton, so I'm going to rush to that conclusion. Manchester City are so much better than Manchester United, and I'm going to rush to that conclusion while they're 2-0 up. Kind of forgetting the fact that there was going to be a kick from Wolves at some point, who have proven themselves stylistically to be a little bit of the thorn in the side of Manchester City recently. Your memory immediately goes back to the game that Manchester City choked in last season when Wolves come from behind to beat them. And it almost looked as if last night was going to follow a very similar pattern. They should have equalised. They should have scored twice in the period when they were on top in the third quarter of the game. The Gabriel Jesus goal is quite, honestly, just a garbage time goal. It's a 2-2 game if Wolves are a little bit more clinical up front. It is as simple as that. Now, they did show some great glimpses. Daniel Podence, who, in fairness, did, completely bottled one or two of those opportunities himself. But he did end up nutmegging Kevin De Bruyne and created the opportunity that allowed Wolves to claw back their one goal of the night. And, Kevin De Bruyne getting nutmegged on the opening night of the season. It was a pretty humiliating moment from him, but he was also the best player on the pitch outside of that particular instance. He looks sublime once again. The issue you'd have, really, well, there's two issues. It's maybe in the central position up front, which Gabriel Jesus needs to prove that he is going to get on to Sergio Aguero's level. And then the other issue, which is a far bigger issue, is that if they don't have Aymeric Laporte available, and this is very much a deja vu moment, then your centre-back partnership of John Stones and Nathan Ake might not be as solid as some people might have hoped for, or potentially the John Stones levelling off that we've seen in recent years. That is potentially very real, and he won't be as good a partner to Nathan Ake as Aymeric Laporte will be. And I think that's actually a statement of fact more than anything else at this point. The question is, how good is Ake going to be alongside Laporte? And I'm sure that's something that City fans are excited for, and that's why you probably need to reserve a little bit more judgment than just 190 minutes. Yeah, and look, Laporte is recovering from COVID-19. We wish him all the best in that. We still don't know what the long tail of the disease is going to be for everybody who gets it. Some people are going to be totally fine. Some people are going to be impacted longer term. So as the season progresses and more footballers actually end up getting the virus, it's going to have an impact at some point on some big team where some players end up not being able to play a bunch of games that we had hoped they would be able to play. Speaking of the virus, the NFL are not fecking around when it comes to
handing out fines for people who have not been wearing their masks or wearing their masks incorrectly. 100 grand has been the fine for the Seahawks coach, Pete Carroll, for San Francisco 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, and for Denver's Vic Fangio each. They've been fined 100 grand each. And you're like, oh, that's grand, the team will pay it. The teams have been fined 250 grand on top of the coaches' fines, which takes over $1 million, the fine for the first 3 people who've been punished for not wearing their masks properly after the second week of the season. First week of the season, they were like, okay, I see what you did. Grand. Second week, they were like, we warned you, and we were serious about it. NFL don't really, the powers that be in the NFL don't get a lot of praise for stuff, but, I think that they are cracking necks and cashing checks.
It's something that it's actually kind of surprising to see this morning. If there was one organisation that I would have thought would have, ignored the fact that a head coach is not wearing a mask, I might have picked the NFL. I'm not going to lie. I might have picked that as the organisation that might have done that. I think this is actually a really good example to set for a multitude of different reasons. Like, you definitely think to yourself, how do we get to a point where, I don't know, you might have more humans at a match than ever before? Like, is it realistic to expect that everybody sitting in their seat wears a mask at all times? Well, if the head coaches of the teams in one of the biggest leagues in the world are being forced to wear their face masks at all times, while I assume communicating all the time, then that's a pretty good example to set.
Have you seen what's happening up the north? There's been a giant row about the Tyrone County final, primarily kicked off by the BBC broadcaster Stephen Nolan. Have you seen any of this?
I saw 1 or 2 Nolan tweets. What specific ones is he saying?
So he said it was disgusting and dangerous. In the here you go. I was going to try and find the exact quote for you so I don't paraphrase it. So he presents the breakfast show on BBC Radio Ulster, right? And he gets 390 grand a year for that, sterling, to broadcast. It's not bad. He's doing all right for himself. I'm just trying to find the exact tweet. Oh, they haven't embedded it here. So the Dungannon won the county final, right? It's the first time, I think, since 1956 or 1965. 56, first time that they've won the title. And they won it after a penalty shootout. I didn't see, but apparently the penalty shootout went round twice. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it was 10 penalties all told, wasn't it?
Yeah,
each.
So like high drama. And obviously 400 hardy souls are allowed in because it's in the 6 counties. And he started his programme off by saying, disgraceful, dangerous scenes as fans from Dungannon, Clarks and Trillick invade the pitch after a game yesterday. And so he's being attacked for attacking the people who were on the pitch, not observing social distancing.
Yeah, like I see Arlene Foster had a pop off him as well yesterday, which I guess some people might say that's to be expected. Ulster GAA have come out as well and condemned this. And
it's funny, Ulster GAA are kind of saying something similar here, like, lads, calm down.
I guess it is. Like, it's obviously quite jarring when you see it happen. There's definitely a moment when I saw the initial Twitter video kind of accompanying a BBC Sport report, and I was like, well, this is a fantastic achievement, and isn't it great for those? Oh, hold on a minute, wait, what? This is something that perhaps we shouldn't be engaging in at the moment. Like, it's probably a case study for what not to do next time, and maybe a little warning before the next big game involving 400 spectators to say, listen, even if your team is absolutely sensational today, folks, even if you just won a first county title in 200 years, please do not enter the field of play. Otherwise, you will not get any more nice things for another little while. Just a little kind of explanation. Just let this be a moment that kind of allows us to not do pitch invasions in future. Like, I know emotions can run high and all that sort of thing, but I mean, your emotions will unfortunately have to run high from in front of a laptop screen next time if something like this happens again.
Well, apparently one line that was in the middle of that was Ulster GAA have warned that Gaelic games may have to go behind closed doors if there's going to be a repeat of those scenes. So everybody is angry at everybody, it turns out. They're just waiting for a reason to get involved in a scrap. That's how the attitude is at the moment, Owen.
I guess we haven't had enough COVID-idiots recently, like outside of the Raven Dublin at the weekend. Has the accessibility of COVID-idiots has probably gone down in recent weeks. You know, I mean, at the start of this whole thing, there was a daily reminder of somebody who didn't know the rules, or somebody,
Jack Grealish, a couple of times.
Jack Grealish, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And people are just waiting for that moment to hop on. Obviously, it shouldn't have happened. Like, there's no question about that. And maybe people actually, it may seem so obvious to people that, you know, a pitch invasion shouldn't be done at the moment. Maybe it's not as obvious when the final whistle, or when the final penalty goes in, or the final penalty save. I don't know exactly what happened.
I think it probably is. I think people know that they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. They're going to do it anyway, and they don't care. That's what happens. They decide in the moment that they're going to be grand. And sure, look, maybe it won't be a super spreader event, and maybe it will. And what are you going to do about it? I suppose ultimately everybody can get angry at each other and use it to draw their sectarian battle lines the way sectarian battle lines have been drawn around every single incident in the north in the last 800 years. This is just another little proxy war being fought out on the airwaves of BBC Radio Ulster and on Twitter. So that's a little bit of joy to inject into everybody's lives this morning. 087 180 180 is the number if you want to get in touch with us. I'm just going to do this quick competition here. I'm not, because it's just been deleted, so we'll do that a little bit later on. Daniel Harris, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. We are definitely going to talk about Manchester United and what happened at the weekend, but I do want to get your thoughts on how Jose Mourinho is handling things at Spurs before we get into that. You know, he's got his superstar signing imminently arriving. The team was amazing in that second half against Southampton at the weekend. So all is rosy in Jose's garden, right?
Not sure. I think that you will see with Mourinho that his teams they've had good players, so they will produce some good performances. But it still doesn't really look like they've got a method that's going to work and that's going to help them dominate games. I guess if you can start getting the best out of Tanguy and Ndombele, that will make a huge difference, because ultimately the way it is at the moment is their defence isn't particularly good. They've got really good attackers and not a whole lot going on in midfield. I mean, they had, I think, Winks and Højbjerg played at the base of midfield in the first game, and then it was Sissoko and Højbjerg in Europe. And ultimately, they're worthy players. They're not rubbish players, but they're not players that are going to enable you to dominate a game. And at that point, you're basically relying on good attackers combining at some point during that game to do enough to win you the game. And it felt quite a lot like that was really what happened against Southampton. But if Tanguy Ndombele can become the player that Spurs thought he was, then that would make a huge difference. But otherwise, I think what we might see is that, I mean, we saw a bit of it at the weekend, actually, is Harry Kane, as well as being a brilliant finisher, Harry Kane is an excellent target man and a really good passer. And it seems that he's going to be dropping a little bit deeper for fast players in front of him. And obviously, when Gareth Bale arrives, that will still be the case, assuming Gareth Bale is still fast.
I was watching this game on Twitter and catching up with it on social media. It seemed to me that the reports were that Ndombele had been preordained punishment substituted for doing something clever and creative in the first half. That was certainly how Twitter was responding when he was hauled off a little bit early.
It's hard to know really what's going on with Mourinho, because he does things that have no apparent explanation, or at least no explanation that will help his team and help his club become what he's meant to be there, stewarding them to become. And it just seems so unlikely that Mourinho is suddenly going to change to go back to the Mourinho that was so brilliant and so compelling at the beginning of his career. It seems much more like, if I was a Spurs fan anyhow, I would be hoping that he managed to not wind up some of the players that I least wanted to leave into leaving, or to mentally checking out, so that by the time the replacement turns up, they've got arrangements to go somewhere else. And it felt like when Mourinho was with United, that happened just in time, more or less. That the players had clearly had enough, but they fired him just before the players would sort of start deciding where else they might go.
Given the signing of Eoin and Bale over the last couple of days, Daniel, it seems that Spurs fans are hoping for Jose Mourinho to tweak his system a little bit to, I guess, encapsulate their specific talents over the next little while. How naive is that expectation that Jose Mourinho might change?
I think the expectation he'll change as an individual is extremely unlikely. But I mean, he might change formation because he's bought 2 fullbacks who are probably better deployed as wing backs. So it is possible that Spurs might change to a 3-4-3 because that would give their centre backs who aren't that reliable safety in numbers as well. And then you could, like Matt Doherty is a really good player, but he's a much better right wing back than the fullback because he's good in front of goal. He's a good finisher and he gets into good positions. And the same with Eoin is he's great. He's great going forward. He'll hopefully have the requisite level of recovery pace to be good. I think we have one of those disturbances right now. There appears to be a door magically opening. I wonder what could be behind it. Where we have Eoin is he's really fast. He's really good on the ball, but you would want him going forward as much as possible, not going backwards. So I think that it might work out to change to a 3-4-3. And I mean, Mourinho's usually been a 4-3-3 bloke, so 4-2-3-1 guy. So it would require some level of change, but I think that is much more likely than Mourinho becoming an extremely different personality to the one that we've seen. And even though he has sort of changed over his career, because what we've seen from Mourinho is that he's basically become consumed by the bad elements that he always had, and they're kind of dampened down the bits that everyone really loved about him in the first place. So he has kind of changed, but I don't think he's suddenly gonna switch back to the Mourinho 15 years ago. But you never know, because I think one of the problems with Mourinho since he left Real Madrid, I guess, is that he's got this stubborn refusal to look at the squad that he's got, look at the players that he's got, and look at the teams that they're playing against, and alter what he expects from a football team and from footballers depending on what he has available to him. So if Mourinho, because people talk about Mourinho's football being outdated, and it might not be the most modern interpretation of how to play, but if you stuck, and I say this a lot, if you stuck his first Chelsea team into this Premier League, they would come very close to winning it, because brilliant players are brilliant players and incredible mentality is incredible mentality. And Mourinho's first Chelsea team had absolutely shitloads of that. And football is unchanging. So where you have talent and mentality, then that will override almost everything that any other team is going to do when you have it in the quantities that he had it in. But what he hasn't done is he hasn't adapted the way that he manages according to different individuals. You're not always going to have ludicrously driven professionals like Lampard, Drogba, Essien, Cech, Terry. And he also hasn't adapted the way that he likes his teams to play according to the style of player that he has and the kind of players that he has. And it doesn't really look like that's going to change, but maybe he'll change to 3-4-3 because he's basically signed himself 2 wing-backs.
There also have to come an acceptance from Jose Mourinho that we now live in, an era where I guess defensive solidity is less valued. I'm not even sure if less valued is the right phrase there, because we've just seen a weekend where we've had 44 goals in one Premier League weekend, the highest ever scoring match day in Premier League history. How long does this sustain for Daniel? Is this quite an early flash in the pan for a season and things will come back to the norm, or is there an acceptance that no, we need to have a capability of scoring 5 goals every 3 or 4 games?
I mean, well, Mourinho's teams scored a lot of goals. His good teams scored a load of goals. I remember there was a time when his Chelsea team, when they had Robin and Duff and Drogba, was scoring. They went through a phase where it just seemed like they were scoring 4 goals in every game. So I don't think defensive solidity is out of fashion. I think that there aren't that many good defenders in the world at the moment. That sometimes happens, and I think that teams want defenders to be able to bring the ball out from the back as well. But if you had a team like Liverpool last season, I think they won 15 league games by the old goal, something like that. And that's partly because you have a lot of match winners, and it's partly because you don't concede that many goals, and you don't concede that many goals at crucial times. Good defending is still important. I mean, the team with the best defence in the Premier League last season pissed the Premier League last season. It's not a coincidence. I
think 3 out of the last 4 years has been the case as well. Let's talk about the situation at Manchester United. Not to paint in too broad brushstrokes, but who is responsible for what we're seeing at the moment? Is it Woodward or is it Solskjaer?
It depends what we mean by what we're seeing. I mean, if we talk about what we're seeing in the first instance as a crap performance against Palace, I would say that it would be a strange individual who looked at that game and didn't think that the major difference between the teams was fitness. I'm going to come on to the differences that weren't fitness in a second, because obviously it would also be a moron who said that was it. But the major difference between the team was fitness. I mean, Andros Townsend talked about it in his interview. He knew that they had a lot more games in their legs than United did. Some of United's players had played against Villa the week before. I think Palace had played 6 friendlies or something, and also played a league game, and they'd won it, so they had confidence. And United didn't have that. And Palace won that game, really. I mean, I know they scored twice towards the end, but Palace won that game in the first 15 minutes, where they basically laid smackdown, where they were quicker to the ball than United, they were sharper, they were more confident than United, because they knew that they were going to be quicker and they knew that they were going to be sharper. And Andros Townsend said exactly that, and that was what happened. Now, that's not all that was going on there, but I think it's also worth saying that Palace were really bad opponents. As I said, they were fit, much, much fitter. They'd won their first game, and also they have really good attackers. And they're really quick on the break, and they're really quick on the press. And that was more or less what happened. So those were, I would say, the 2 main reasons why United got beat like the way that they did was the difference in fitness, and Palace just being a really bad opponent when you're not fit like United weren't. But thought that Ole got the team wrong. I couldn't believe he didn't pick Van der Beek for those reasons. I knew that United would be slow and tired relative to Palace, but then you've got a guy who has actually had some semblance of a pre-season and is a new signing, so might give your team some impetus, and you leave him on the bench. Thought that was a ridiculous decision. Also, United went into that game with Fosu Mensah at right back, McTominay towards the right midfield, and Daniel James on the right wing. I mean, that is effectively saying we're going to forget about this right side of the pitch. And I'm not sure if there was anything Ole could have done better than that. But I think one of the other reasons United got beat like that was the players played out their asses. And sometimes that will happen. And when you have lots of brilliant attackers, and United do have that, you hope that one of them will get you out of jail in a situation like that. But sometimes it just doesn't work out, where they all play badly. And that was what happened. I mean, Pogba was dreadful, Martial was dreadful, Fernandez went missing. I mean, that's hardly happened at all. So you have all those things. Combining, and they all combine together to deliver what we saw to be the result. And that is just, again, there are lots of reasons. The problem for United now is that there's not a particular reason to think they'll be loads fitter tonight at the weekend. And they can't afford the bad start, because then you start to get into the speculation of, well, is the manager good enough? Are the players good enough? And a good start is really important. I think that, a good start's really important. I mean, what a ludicrous thing to say. But for a good team, and you can think back to seasons when United won the league, they didn't always win the first couple of games. They started slowly, and it was still possible for something to happen. But I think about 2006-07, when United hadn't won the league for 3 seasons, and they thrashed for them 5-1 on the first day, and they took the momentum and they took that through the opening part of the season. And as a new team looking to ascend to a level that they hadn't reached yet, that was really important. And United need to find a way of getting a result. And I mean, quite a lot of it is just the players playing better. And we're talking about the touch, we're talking about the movement and the decision making, things that, even though they're not fit, they should be doing better. And I would expect to see quite a strong team tonight against Luton, because the players need a game and they need some confidence before they play in the league at the weekend. Whereas ordinarily you would expect quite a lot of young players to play in the League Cup. I don't think that's going to happen tonight, because I think it's too important to get the miles on the clock and a result on the board. So I would expect that to be the case.
What were your thoughts on Maguire and Lindelof?
I mean, I guess the same as they've always been. They're not bad players. I'd like United to have better players than both of them, but a better player than Lindelof is essential, partly just to be better than Lindelof, and also some legs are required alongside Maguire. You can't have 2 centre-backs that can't run, and that is what United have. And I said all the way through last season that United's defending was not as good as United's defensive record. I mean, Chris Smalling is still at the club. He is better than Lindelof, and I would be picking him. I'm not sure why. I mean, you hear some rumours, and I don't have any kind of handle on the Alex Telles rumours. He is much better going forward than Luke Shaw. I'm kind of surprised that they're signing a fullback who isn't seriously fast, because if you're not going to sign a centre-back, then at least try and find some speed elsewhere to cover those defenders that aren't quick. But I do think that I think that Lindelof must have run out of chances, and if Bailly's fit, then I would expect him to come in, because it doesn't seem like Tuanzebe is fit yet. And I would expect Wan-Bissaka to come in, because he gives you a bit more cover behind the right side of centre-back, which has been Lindelof. But yeah, I mean, Maguire and Lindelof aren't the standard. I'm not sure why you would be trying to find a left-back, even though you need a left-back, when what you really need is a centre-back, unless you're absolutely certain that Tuanzebe is going to be good enough, or that Mengi is going to be good enough, and you're going to play them soon. Otherwise, that new centre-back is essential. And I mean, I've been on here, I said it before United bought Maguire, that Maguire might be better than what United had, but he definitely wasn't good enough. But I would be hesitant to judge the whole team, the defenders, based on how dodgily they played against Palace, because their average general median mode-ish level of performance is a lot better than that.
Like you make the point, it's interesting kind of talking about that defence, and the point you make there that their defensive record was a lot better than their defending last season, because like you mentioned there a moment ago that Liverpool pissed the league last season, like they only conceded 3 goals less than Manchester United. So if you looked at it on that model alone, they're not that far off Liverpool, but actually via the eye test, there is a huge gulf between them.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, we also look at it the other way, that Liverpool would do very well to win as many games by the odd goal a game. That kind of thing doesn't happen that often. But yeah, I don't think it would be particularly controversial to say that Liverpool's goalkeeper and defenders are better than United's individually and as a unit. And I also think there's an element of Liverpool's get better protection from the midfield, because the teams approach playing the game in different ways. And Liverpool are a more settled team who've been playing together for longer. So that also makes a big difference. But yeah, sometimes, like when the season that United finished second in the league under Mourinho, the defensive record was good, but the defensive record was mainly good because De Gea stopped everything in sight. And last season, it felt like they gave up a lot of big chances that the opponents missed, or that they just managed to scrape some kind of recovery challenge and get away with. But they didn't look like, you didn't feel confident when the team was defending that they wouldn't give up a goal or a chance. And sometimes when you're watching football, it's that feeling: do I feel nervous here, or do I feel comfortable here? And there was quite a lot of times watching United defend where, as a United supporter, I felt uncomfortable, and that is a good indicator of an unreliable defence, I think.
And is there not a situation here, Daniel, where perhaps Greenwood, Martial and Rashford were actually overperforming last season, and perhaps we got carried away with the strength of this Manchester United attack because they were devoid of opportunities on Saturday night?
No, I don't think that. I think those are 3 excellent players. You don't score the number of goals that Martial scored, and in the way that he scored them, and it looked like a culmination of the improvement that's carried on through the career, when he was brilliant when he turned up, to think, oh, actually, maybe he's not as good as I literally saw him being with my eyes. Rashford is out of form. I mean, he was out of form after lockdown. He played badly at the weekend, and this is a problem when you don't have any kind of replacement, that you keep playing them through that form, whereas it might help to be taken out and have another player to bring in instead of him. But United don't really have that, so they haven't been able to do it. And Greenwood, as Ole said beforehand, shouldn't have played during the summer. And I mean, the idea of those internationals that players, I mean, United are ultimately, and this is not really a complaint even, but United are to some extent collateral damage of coronavirus, that they played long into the close season, then a lot of their players then played internationals and barely had a break at all. And I guess looking back, perhaps what should have happened was that the authorities should have said, if you played in those later stages of the Europa League and Champions League knockouts, then you're not allowed to play in the international games. That would have made sense. But you've got a player like Mason Greenwood, who must be physically, might well be feeling it. He hasn't played that level of games at that level ever. And whilst you can easily say, well, he's young, he should be strong, your body needs time to get used to doing certain things, which is one of the reasons why when managers bring players through, young players through, they put them in and take them out. Part of it is mental fitness, and part of it is physical fitness. And both of those things were the case with Greenwood, even in a normal season. Whereas in last season, the games were coming one after the other, and he was playing all of them because United didn't have options. So the idea that after a little bit of time off, but not a lot of time off, and a lot of football and a lot of upheaval, he looked a bit, I don't know what the word would be. He didn't produce the usual standard of performance you would expect from him against Palace. I would impute from that all these other circumstances were what the case was, not that we had all somehow misjudged Mason Greenwood and actually he's not as good as we think he is, because he is every bit as good as we think he is.
Is there not a case to be made that City had exactly the same issues and produced a performance that was slicker and more physically energetic, at least in that first half last night?
Yeah, for sure. City are better than United. I mean, that's not... We know that.
Even the physical, even the fitness side of it, which would seem to me still that you have a young manager who's getting to grips with running a super club and hasn't quite got to the point where even his conditioning is at the level that it's supposed to be.
I'm not sure. That would be, at that point, we're verging into speculation. I mean, we could definitely speculate that might be the case. I need to also, I guess, have a closer look at which of City's players are playing as much football as United's. I mean, leading up to lockdown, again, I don't want to make excuses. United were crap at the weekend, and it may well be that their conditioning coach isn't as good as City's. I don't know. It's possible. It's more than possible. But City's players hadn't played as much leading up to lockdown as United because they hadn't been forced to plough through every game because they had proper strength in depth. Gabriel Jesus ran his arse off last night. Had he played the international games? I mean, he definitely hadn't played in the Nations League. I don't think Brazil played. So he is likely to have been fresher because he hadn't been overplayed to the same extent, and he'd had more of a break.
Okay, so fundamentally, it's about the size of the squad and the fact that they haven't made the investment. Which
I can look at the size of the squad and I can look at how much the players played after lockdown and say, well, I can see that is a fact.
Okay.
So I can see that is operative.
So that goes back to Woodward's.
City have better fitness coaches than United, and maybe they do, but I couldn't come to any kind of conclusion because I don't know whether that's true or not.
So ultimately, this goes right back to the first question: who is responsible? And most of the responsibility seems to be with Woodward for not actually giving Solskjaer what he needs to succeed. Is this terminal, or is there a recovery to come at some point soon? Can Solskjaer wrestle this back?
It's one game, of course. It's one game. United hadn't been beaten in the league since the beginning of February. So why would I ignore everything that I saw and then decide that this game that came in very particular circumstances, which we were just talking about, is going to tell me everything about everything that's going to happen next? Now, we can also look at the run that United went on and say, well, as they tired towards the end of the season, it became harder for them to get results and it became harder for them to create chances. But then, not that long before the end of the season, the last time they played Palace at Selhurst Park, they didn't play particularly well that night. They looked tired that night, but some of their attacking play was still brilliant, and some of those attackers are still really good players. Now, they've got some things to work out. Where does Van der Beek fit in? I think that Van der Beek is going to give Paul Pogba some thoughts about how he's going to have to play to stay in his position, because I don't think Van der Beek has come to sit the side. He definitely doesn't give that impression, and he looks like a player who's good enough to start for United. But to go back to where I started, the main difference between United and Palace was ultimately the fitness. And there were other things going on as well. Perhaps the team, they could have picked a better team. I think he could have picked a better formation as well. Like, I look at United and I think this is not a 4-2-3-1 team, it's a 4-3-3 team. Because what you end up with in that situation is you end up with Pogba, who's the kind of second sitting midfield player, is much too deep too often. And if you played 4-3-3, then he wouldn't have the obligation or feel or be inclined or be told that he has to provide more defensive cover, and he should be getting much further forward. And if that were to be the case, then United, I think, would have looked more like scoring in that period where they looked like they might get an equaliser against Palace.
Who is that midfield three then? Who is the middle three of the 4-3-3?
I mean, to me at the moment, looking at it, I would have Fernandes and Van der Beek, and then it sort of depends on the opposition who you might have the other team to be. I mean, Pogba, in theory, should be able to play that anchor role. We've seen him play with that discipline for France. He's got the long-range passing, and he's fast and he's strong. That's basically what you would be looking for in someone who can play that position. Whether Ole would ever pick him in that position, whether he would fancy playing in that position. That's a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, I don't know. But I would say that those three would work as a threesome against a lot of teams. You might want to change it up and play a diamond in some games and then play two strikers. But if you do that, then you require quite a lot of attacking width from your fullbacks, and United aren't quite getting that at the moment. So there are, when you watch any kind of game or any kind of sporting event and something happens and then there's a result, there will always be lots of different things that combine to make the result what the result was, and there'll never be one thing, and some things will always have more to do with it than others. But I wouldn't look at that United performance against Palace and say, well, it's all gone to shit because of that, because there's so many other things that contributed to that. And I would also look at what I'd seen prior to then. Like, it's a fair point to wonder what it will take to get them getting results while they're getting fit, because I think that is a problem, because you don't want to go 5 games without a win. Then you're under ridiculous pressure just to save the season that early on, and then that is problematic. But yeah, they do need to find a way of getting results over the next few games while they're getting themselves up to fitness. But they haven't suddenly become much less good than they had proved over the course of half a season that they are.
You spoke about maybe taking Marcus Rashford out of the rotation. They don't really have much opportunity to do that at the moment. The best opportunity for that would be if they signed Jadon Sancho, and then all of a sudden everybody would get a load of minutes and we'd get to see patterns emerge. Do you think it's more or less likely that Jadon Sancho is a Manchester United player by the end of the transfer window?
I don't know. I totally be speculating. It depends. I wouldn't be surprised either way. I mean, it's fun. United feels like they've sort of backed Dortmund into a corner now, where everyone's playing Billy Big Bollocks, where Dortmund has said, well, he's not for sale. So that it requires some sort of climb down. But at the same time, for United to then go and offer, if United offer what the price is, there's no way Dortmund aren't going to take it, because £120 million for anyone, particularly in this market, is ridiculous money. I'm not sure. I don't know what United plan to spend, because if you look at, let's say they are indeed interested in Alex Telles, that cannot be a difficult deal to do, but they still haven't done it. And so that suggests that maybe there isn't any more money at all until players leave and no one's gone anywhere. So again, I'm totally speculating. Do I think Sancho will go to United? So at this point, my inclination is not, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did.
Okay. And at 120 million as a Manchester United fan, are you happy with that?
I couldn't care less how much money they spend on Jadon Sancho.
Yeah.
Because the alternative, it just goes out in dividends. And so, yeah, I couldn't care less what they pay for Sancho. I understand why, as club owners, businessmen, they would balk at paying £120 million for a player in this market. And if they said, well, we're not doing that, but here's £100 million to go and spend on as many players as you think you can get with that money, and it turns out that they buy a different right winger, or they buy a left back, a centre back, and a sitting midfield player, that would be something as well. So, but I don't know.
Daniel, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us.
All right, see you again, lads. Have a good day.
Daniel Harris giving us some thoughts on the situation at Manchester United and at Spurs indeed as well. Now, the Nike Football 2021 Liverpool FC third kit has been inspired by the checkered scarves and flags that adorn the Kop each home game, the Gold Premier League winners patch, and also the UCL winners patch are available to be printed on new sales of the 2021 third shirt. The new kit is now available to pre-order in store and online. This morning we've got a €100 voucher to give away for the official Liverpool FC store in the ILAC Centre. Get over to our Twitter @OffTheBall for the chance to win that prize. If you're a Liverpool fan, then this is obviously for you, or if there is a Liverpool fan in your life, then this is for you as well. So get over to @OffTheBall for your chance to win that prize. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. What do you think is going to happen with Man United this season?
I'd like the evidence on the opening game isn't amazing. I definitely think that there is a lot of stock you can put into the Crystal Palace argument, them being better primed for Saturday night. But just because that argument is a viable one doesn't mean that Manchester United don't take a hell of a lot of the blame for that. Why weren't Manchester United prepared as well? Like, they had one less game played. It's not like Crystal Palace have put in half a season, and it's not like this bizarre Europa League situation or European qualifier situation where you have leagues starting in different seasons because they exist in different climates. Manchester United had a bye. That's all there was. Like, do you see NFL teams coming in off the bye and performing poorly the next week? Not necessarily. Now, I know that they have a body of work played before that, but like, that is the job of Manchester United staff, is to ensure that they are ready for that. And to say, to kind of give that as a free pass to Manchester United, I know that's not what Daniel was doing, but I'm sure some Manchester United fans are giving you a free pass for that reason, which I don't think is good enough. I think that there needs to be questions asked if a team isn't fully prepared for their first game of the season, because it's either that or else that is the norm for Manchester United. That I don't think is going to be the case. And like, I don't actually really know where to fall on this attacking trio that Manchester United have at the moment, because I was as guilty as everybody else of getting blown away by them right after the restart. And like, Greenwood looked absolutely incredible. It looked like he would score with every single attempt. Martial looked fantastic. Rashford is a bit off form, but still as a unit, they looked brilliant.
Well, let's see them play.
Let's see them play. Yeah. Like, I know Daniel James obviously started at the weekend. And like, I mean, I obviously, for obvious but also less obvious reasons, make comparisons between Greenwood and another great young striker or forward in Phil Foden. Phil Foden was good last night, so we'll see.
Okay, all right. 0879 180 180 is the number if you want to get in touch with us by WhatsApp. Michael Verney is with us. Michael, good morning to you. How are you?
Ger, how are you?
Good. The county finals have really been ratcheting up the quality of play that we've been seeing in GAA. Early season, there's a lot of club games. Some teams are getting blown out. People weren't sure about this whole idea of a split season, but I think more people are coming around to it as the games have become that level where two teams, very evenly matched, unbelievable drama, and the weather's still good enough for us to be able to go, this is glorious sunshine. There's a bit of fly in the ball.
Yeah, no more than the county campaign, I suppose, Ger. Like, the early rounds of the Leinster Championship and the early rounds of Connacht, I suppose, wouldn't be hectic many years, but when you get to that last 16 or that last 8, you're getting games that are very, very hard to call in perfect conditions, and that's kind of what's happening at the moment. I think this weekend is the busiest weekend of county finals so far. Last weekend was a brilliant weekend. I was happy to be down in Thurles as the drama unfolded there between Killadangan and Lockmore Castleiney. I'd never seen anything like it at club level, to be honest with you. There was 13 seconds between John McGrath's 65 going over the bar at one end and Brian Malachney putting the ball in the net at the far end for Killadangan to win their first Tip Senior Hurling Championship in the most dramatic of fashion. After a brilliant game, like massive high scoring, Lockmore hit a hat-trick in the first half and we're still beaten in the wind-up. But yeah, great drama, and the quality, I suppose it was probably only natural that the quality was going to increase as long as the weather doesn't tail off. The pitches are still in great order. Thurles was in superb order at the weekend. The conditions are still really good for hurling and football at this time of the year. So yeah, the quality has been brilliant, and what better advertisement for club action and club hurling in particular than last Sunday's Tip County final?
Because it probably, in fairness, there were a lot of people who were wondering what the quality was actually going to be like, and there was definitely a core group of people who probably still needed to be won over to the whole notion of the split season. But games like this, let's spool forward to a point where we all live in a post-COVID land and we all have vaccines, where actually that's happening in May or June in glorious sunshine, and we've watched the thing evolve, and we know that there's going to be an intercounty, we know that there's going to be a club provincial championship and All-Ireland as well, and all of a sudden it was like, actually, they're All-Ireland contenders, what's going to happen in Kilkenny, what's happening in Limerick, what's happening in Galway, and suddenly the storylines begin to unfold, the narratives emerge, we know more about these club teams, we fall in love with these club teams, and there's a lot more to like about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's because I suppose you always want what you can't have. It's a kind of a natural thing in life, but the fact that there's no provincial All-Ireland campaign just has you thinking, like, who would you have as favourites? Ballyhale are obviously still to get out of Kilkenny yet or win the Kilkenny Championship. Like, are they favourites or are Napirshick favourites after putting up the highest score ever in a Limerick hurling final? Killadangan, the new kids on the block, Ballygunner have been thereabouts and have won a Munster title in recent years, beating in the Munster final last year. Schlockneil are probably the ones that are probably missing out on it most, because they've won 8 Derry titles in a row, and when they test themselves at provincial level. So I think it's just what you were saying even about the quality as well. No more than a county team, when you get 2 or 3 months where you're just with this squad, where you're just with your club squad, the standards will increase. Like, if you look at county action, it's a lot to do with conditions, obviously, but in January and February, the action is not great. Lads are only kind of getting fit. Systems and game plans are only being kind of bedded in. Whereas now, the clubs have been with each other the guts of about 3 months, and the quality is increasing probably every week as a result of that, just because they're solely with that squad. So, yeah, it would be very exciting to be looking forward to a provincial campaign next year. I think next year's a really, really interesting one as well, in the sense that I was chatting to Mick Bohan recently, the Dublin ladies football boss, and he was just asking, what's going to happen in 2021? He kind of thinks that the plan, I know it's very, very hard to plan, but the plans for 2021 have a massive effect on 2020. So the All-Ireland football and All-Ireland hurling are going to be played, a week and a half before Christmas in 2020. Are those squads expected to roll on into the new year, start league action at the end of January, start of February? If they do, I think a lot of people will be fatigued, both mentally and physically, with it. Just the fact that it will be rolling the whole way through. You could be picking up an awful lot of injuries. You could have management teams stepping down just because it's so much pressure. So I think the whole COVID thing has had a massive effect on the landscape of the games, really, and the planning going forward. I just wonder what the 2021 season will look like.
Well, that's a great point. So, because the plan was that it was supposed to be the same as this year was supposed to be before COVID, right? 2021 is supposed to be untouched, and then the split season is going to be, if it all gets voted through, the year after that, right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah, that's right.
So why not just bring everything forward and go, Special Congress has decided that the way to do it is next year is actually going to be the same as this year, where there will be a club season and an inter-county season. The club season is going to come first, the inter-county season is going to come second, and actually everything that we've learned from this year we're going to put into practice next year. Wouldn't that make the most sense?
Well, I think it makes an awful lot of sense. Obviously, there's certain rules, and championships are in place for a certain period of time. I believe the current championship setup, obviously it's been changed for this year, but I think that is to stay in place until the end of the 2021 championship. League and championship, but I think things will have to change for 2021 to run in any way smoothly. I think there'll have to be massive changes, whether that's a really, really shortened league campaign, because you cannot have games at the end of January next year. You can't have, just say Dublin or Kerry or whoever wins the football All-Ireland 6 days before Christmas. You can't really expect them to be playing league games a month later. So lads that have picked up injuries, that off-season, there will be no off-season. So I think they really need to look at 2021 being a different type of a season. And, funnily enough, the lack of a provincial campaign at the moment in the club and the lack of an All-Ireland campaign, I don't see any reason why, if they did change things up in 2021, why you couldn't play off provincial and All-Ireland campaign in 5 or 6 weeks at the start of the year. We've been used to All-Ireland semi-finals and finals in the early part of the year. So I wouldn't see any reason why they couldn't kind of plough ahead with that in 2021. But there are going to have to be massive changes. Otherwise, I see a lot of people opting out. I see a lot more pressure on managers. Managers will just basically go on the whole way through. Players won't get time to rest up, won't get time to get any surgeries or do any rehab that they need to do. And 2021 could be even more chaotic, I'd say, than 2020.
Well, the economics of that wouldn't be sustainable either, particularly as there's no sign of there being crowds available to come to matches, and so therefore all that revenue disappears. But the whole notion of there being a full 10-month inter-county season in 2021 without that revenue somewhere, that just doesn't make any sense anymore.
No, I couldn't see how it's feasible. There's some county boards. I was chatting to Billy Foley, the Westmeath chairman, there about a month or 6 weeks ago, and he was nearly adamant that Westmeath would not be able to field county teams in 2021. And a lot of counties will just about get away with it this year because it's such a shortened season. Expenses will be an awful lot less because there's going to be an awful lot less training. But if they start back up in January, I just see, a lot of the big hitters will be able to survive, probably no problem. But a lot of the lower tiers will just not be able to provide the money that's needed to keep that going. Probably for, just for a Leitrim or a Westmeath, we'll say, just for the 6 or 7 months that they're probably realistically going to be in the leagues and championships. So I'm just not sure how that's going to work. It's very hard to obviously maybe think of 2021 at the moment when we're just trying to get through what we're in at the moment. But what's going on now has massive ramifications for what's going forward.
Particularly if games were to get delayed. So say the month of December is a complete disaster in weather terms, not impossible. There might be snow, who knows. 2.5 weeks of snow and all of a sudden those games are starting in January. You win in All-Ireland the last week of January, you start your first league campaign the next week.
No, it can't. That just can't work. And I think they obviously haven't probably taken a massive look at 2021 because they've been so focused on just trying to get kind of hold what we have and try and play the 2020 championships. But it's definitely going to have massive ramifications. And there's no reason why the 2021 calendar couldn't be ripped up. Just like everything. Like this is like you have to put an asterisk beside 2020 and 2021 and just kind of say you're going to just have to make changes, whatever changes are needed, just to make sure for the smooth running of these championships and to make sure that players, management and everybody is looked after. And as you say, there's not going to be massive crowds in grounds in January and February and probably even March next year. Who knows when there'll be big crowds let back into these places. So they're not going to be massive revenue streams. So I do think they need to take a massive look at what they're doing.
And the answer is the answer that they've arrived at, which is a split season where the first half of the year is club games where, you know, obviously it is a very important revenue at local level and for county boards and for provincial councils. But ultimately, the big revenue will come hopefully in the second part of the year when we are, fingers crossed, there might be a potential for a vaccine at least. And lo and behold, you arrive at the system that everybody has kind of, without publicly getting to that point, said that they agree on.
Yeah, it's funny. We've kind of sleepwalked into the system that I think everybody wants. There was a debate about it, but it probably wasn't on the table. And the GPA and probably the best bit of PR work that they've done in the last 20 odd years, I'd say, by actually suggesting that system. Because I haven't heard anybody come out and say anything negative towards it, because it totally makes sense. And with the way things were going on, the fact that we were in the middle of a club season and everybody, as I said before, 100% of players are club players, and they're all very happy with the club season. They're happy with not having pressure, not having county pressure coming on, not being pulled away to county training, not being pulled away to county matches. They're happy to be in with their clubs again. And I think we've fallen on a system that I think will work efficiently for both club and county and allow, I suppose, the clubs that provide all these county players to get their chance at it as well and get a fair chance at it with their county players, with the availability of their county players. So I think, yeah, we've kind of sleepwalked into the perfect system, I think.
Yeah, I guess that is the situation we have. We may as well look back on some of the action from the weekend, Michael. I mean, there's been some, scenes that have gone viral from Dungannon for a start. The thing that preceded that, though, which I just want to get your take on, is the penalty shootouts. Like, I'm not sure how many of these you've seen over around the country for watching streams of club games over the last little while. Does it work? Is this a thing that we should be looking at and keeping for the next little while, deciding games via penalties?
It's actually funny, the Down Hurling final was on last weekend and it went to a draw and it went to extra time, Portaferry and Ballycran, and didn't go to penalties. I'm not wholly sure. I tried to find out exactly what the reasons were, but that didn't go to penalties, whereas Lockmore and Killadangan was ready to go to penalties. Interestingly enough, actually, Dara Egan, who used to play in goals and outfield with Tipperary, had his he was sub-goalie for Killadangan. He had his jersey on in the 81st minute, getting ready to come on for the penalty shootout for Killadangan, and then took it off when John McGrath put the 65 over. And I don't think he thought 13 seconds later that his club would be winning their first county title. But the penalty shootout's an interesting one. There's obviously massive, a time, we just don't have time now going into county season, so they're trying to get games played off. It's hugely dramatic. It's unbelievably dramatic. I don't think it's going to affect, clubs that win. I think they'll be happy no matter what way they win. Clubs that lose, I think at the moment people are kind of happy enough that these games are actually being played. It's not a great way to lose a game. I still would favour a golden score where that they'd restart play by a throw-in, and the first team to score, if it goes to a draw and an extra time, or draw after extra time, that the first team to score would be the winners. I always like that golden goal concept in soccer, and I think in hurling, it's teams aren't going to be able to sit back because you can score from 100 yards as well, and you can score a free from 100 yards. So I think that would be exciting too. Football might allow for maybe more kind of negative tactics and cynical fouling outside the 65, but I still think it would be hugely interesting. As regards drama, penalties are great. Tullamore beat Forban. They knocked them out in the semi-final the other night. It was the first penalty shootout in Offaly. I think it was 9-8 on penalties. I think there was more penalties missed nearly than scored, even though it was 9-8. Hugely dramatic, but I suppose people are aware that the games generally need to be finished on the day and are okay with that. I prefer something like a golden score personally, though.
Golden score sounds class.
What about an NFL style? Got to score twice to win, or
as in back-to-back.
Or you get to a point, where it can be golden score, but both teams need opportunities to be able to actually get that golden score, rather than just hopping down the pitch from the throw-in and actually putting it over the bar. Or even if it's like silver goal, what was that, Euro 2000?
This is getting complicated.
This sounds very convoluted.
Just stick with the penalties, basically.
It's interesting. I do think something like a golden score, as you said there, or two score, that the system you're suggesting there from the NFL. I just think it would be interesting. I just think you should try and keep it.
In hurling, it could be first to 3 points, so it's a goal or 3 points, and that way at least there's a chance for, if you score 1 point from 100 yards out, the opportunity to at least not lose on that straight away. Because it could be over straight away.
And just what you're saying there, a team could be 2 points to 0 up, and the other team could try and force a goal at the other end and win, which would be very interesting. Yeah, in football, if you play the first to 3 points, it could go on a long time. but in hurling, I think it might work. Yeah,
only in Ulster. There was some other amazing stories from the weekend. Dahi Burke is chasing a double, senior hurling, senior football double. There's been quite a few clubs pushing for doubles over the last couple of weeks. Is that just because certain clubs have found a fitness and a style, or is this, I don't know, is there a mass trend emerging, or is this a bit of a coincidence?
The Dahi Burke one is interesting. So he's trying to become the first player in 50 years to win a Galway senior hurling title and football title in the 1 year. It's generally, there haven't been too many lads that have had chances. Alan Kearns has won hurling with Clarenbridge and a football with Salthill Knocknacara, but not in the same year. But if he's going to do it this year, with the postponement of the Capitagal St Thomas's game last weekend due to a COVID concern, he's going to have to win. I think it's the hurling on the Saturday and the football on the Sunday, which would be a fair weekend if he can achieve that. And he's captain of the Turlough Hurlers as well. Just on the thing you said about the double, in some counties, the likes of Wexford, so Shelmaliers won the hurling title, and everything was just concentrated on hurling in Wexford starting off. So they hadn't won a hurling in 2013 and had kind of been going from hurling football every odd week. But now they focus wholly on hurling. We're able to win the hurling, and they'll probably be favourites to win the football because they can just concentrate on that and they don't have to jump from Billy to Jack. The same would be, I think Mount Leinster Rangers won the hurling in Carlow, and they're still going in the football. Forban and / Belmont were still going for a double in Offaly, even though they were mixing hurling 1 week, football another week. I definitely think it's just because counties that have actually done split seasons within their club scene, which one have gone hurling first, football next, or vice versa, their chances are obviously massively increased just because teams are focusing on one code. Lockmore beaten in the hurling last weekend. That was their 10th week in a row between hurling and football, with I think it's 13 of the 15 start for both teams, which is a phenomenal achievement. They were beaten in extra time the other day in the hurling, and now they rock in and play Michael Quinlivan's Clonmel on Sunday. So they'll be trying to lift themselves back up. But yeah, it's a funny kind of an emerging trend. Another trend that is quite interesting as well is we kind of briefly touched on it a couple of weeks ago about the possibility with the kind of shortened inter-county season that some lads might kind of just rock from club straight into county.
Yeah.
And it seems like that has happened. Gary Sice is back in with Galway. He's 36. He retired 3 years ago. He's been playing brilliant stuff for Carafin, who are obviously still in the Galway Senior Football Championship. But he's been called back in by Pádraig Joyce because he's obviously not going to have a massive pre-season. Experience probably becomes even more of an important kind of a tool for a squad in the winter, just because it's not going to be as fast. You can probably afford to have lads that maybe can't run 100% the whole time or can't do 100 metres in 12 seconds or anything like that, and you can kind of use their head a bit more. And interestingly, I was chatting to Mickey Graham last week, the Cavan football boss, and he kind of made a point before about, ringing lads up to come into the Cavan squad and lads kind of saying no, or I'll think about it or whatever. But he said he had to make maybe 5 or 6 calls just before when they came back training last Tuesday night, and he just said everyone accepted straight away. Nobody even thought about it. They were all just eager to get back in and eager to get back involved. So that might be a knock-on effect of this year's championship as well. Now, whether those same lads will be as eager to come in on the 1st of January if the 2021 season is starting as early as we kind of think it might is questionable. But definitely I think you will see some guys that were away or were not going to be around for the county championships or plan travelling or plan taking a year out, it's 2 to 3 months. So I think a lot of lads will go in and go gung-ho during that time. But it's interesting to hear that lads are coming back rather than going away.
One last story we wanted to talk about is the situation in Donegal. So it appears as if a member of the Kilcar team has tested positive for COVID-19, or somebody certainly associated with the squad. They're due to play the county final this week. At the moment, that's the only positive test in the squad. The county board is still planning for the game to go ahead, which I think they probably have to do. But this one's on a bit of a knife edge at the moment.
It is. It's a disastrous scenario for obviously the Kilcar player, who has probably been playing with Kilcar for the last 15 or 20 years from underage the whole way up, that he won't be able to play a part. But I think John Horan kind of said that if there was positive tests within squads, like that county squads, that they were going to have to step aside. The fact that it's just one case and there doesn't look to be anything connected to it at the moment. Now that might change over the coming days, and I know the chairman has said that the county final could be cancelled if there's more positives or more concerns going into it. But it's a disastrous situation for the club to be in or the player to be in. You don't want to be the one. Like, imagine, just say there was 3 or 4 more cases as a result of that, and I don't know, somehow the Donegal final wasn't played this year as a result, or there was some sort of they had to forfeit it because of that. That's not a situation that any player wants to be put in. And then there are concerns that someone might, potentially, not reveal information that they should reveal, just because they don't want to let themselves down, they don't want to let the club down, and don't want to let the whole kind of competition down. So hopefully it's not a great case for that player involved, but they're probably right to plough on at the moment. As I said, the way things are moving, it could change very, very quickly in a couple of days. I think a lot of places would just be happy to get their county championships played at this rate, because it's probably going to get a little bit worse and a bit more complicated over the coming weeks. But yeah, it's not a great situation for that player or Kilcar to be in, definitely not.
No, it looks that way for sure. Michael, great to have you with us this morning. Thanks a million.
Thanks a million, cheers on.
Michael Verney there from I&M, where he writes about GAA and horse racing, of course, giving us some thoughts on the weekend's GAA. OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. And a reminder, if you don't have the OTB Sports app, get it. It's in the App Store. It's nothing. It's free and it's brilliant. Time for the papers.
OTB AM.
Front page of OTBsports.com. I wouldn't say Leinster have one great player. Stuart Barnes dropping some truth bombs on Leinster last night on Monday Night Rugby. For the girls' mentality, that's what we wanted to hear. Vera Pauw talking about the Ireland women's football team. The writing is probably on the wall. Pat Nevin is calling time on Kepa's Chelsea future. And Jordan Conroy named in the Sevens World Series Dream Team. And then, did John Egan deserve a red card for this Watkins challenge? The video is up on OTBsports.com. That's the back page headline on the Star this morning. Wild card. Blades fume at Egan's dismissal. John Egan was claiming, of course, that the Villa player was pulling his arm as he was 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I think, was the argument they were making. Man City beat Wolves 3-1. North may shut doors. This is after the pitch invasion, celebrating Dungannon's victory in the Tyrone Championship after they won at the weekend after a penalty shootout. COVID, Spurs Carlisle tie set to be off after 18 Orient positive tests. So this game tonight might not go ahead between Spurs and Leyton Orient. Foden scores again. See what they did there, Eoin? Do you see what they did? Wild, I'm livid. Chris is getting wound up with refs. Chris Wilder thinks that the referees are out to get the lads at Sheffield United. The Mirror back page. Paradise City. Wolves are taken down by the Paradise City, where De Bruyne's dream and the goals are pretty. Do you know the song, Eoin?
I do, yes.
What is it?
It's Sweet Home Alabama. No, it's not. What is it? Oh, what is it? You've caught me on the hot. I actually kind of only caught the end of the headline.
Wolves are taken down by the Paradise City, where De Bruyne is a dream and the goals are a pretty.
Oh, it is. It is like Sweet Home Alabama. That's what I'm going for, you know.
Paradise City?
Oh, Guns N' Roses.
There you go.
Is it Guns N' Roses?
It is
Paradise
Guns N'
City?
Roses. It is Guns N' Roses. Paradise City. Sweet Home Alabama. Fans return to be scrapped. Sports to ask Prime Minister for $1.5 billion rescue package to aid arts sector received. Similar to aid arts sector received. That's the London Times, where It was like, oh, we're going to have fans back in the stadiums really soon, maybe September, maybe October, and now not for a long time to come. Spurs game tonight looks like it's going to be off. Abramovich-owned rivals. Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich held a stake in a player bought by Liverpool from a Portuguese club and in another player who appeared against the London side in the Champions League, according to BBC's Panorama. So you just can't do that. You can't own other teams' players, third-party ownership, all that kind of stuff. Not allowed. The Irish Daily Mail, final warning, Ulster Council says no more pitch invasions. And Wolves, Kevin De Bruyne scoring against Wolves last night for Manchester City. The Guardian back page is Foden celebrating with Raheem Sterling and Leyton Orient. That game there, plan for fans return from October is gone. Egan's red hurts Irish, so he's going to be out of action for a couple of weeks. I don't know if it does hurt us, does it? That much? Is it not better that he's not playing any games? And actually no chance of an injury. Looks fit and healthy and well. He's playing all right apart from that. The back page of the Racing Post, Ole's boys to fire a volley. That's they're playing tonight. And if you're Solskjaer, do you pick your full team tonight, Eoin?
I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought that Brighton at weekend is too big a game, and there's going to be enough over the next little while to keep you tipping along. I don't think they need a tune-up. Some people will say that they needed one before last weekend, but I don't know. I think that excuse is only is a little bit half-baked.
Okay. Ulster GAA issue warning as PSNI launch investigation, so it's obviously a serious event. Levy return boost for Leinster. So Dan Levy, who'd been linked with matchday squads all of the matches so far, is actually going to play for Leinster A against Ulster Ravens this Friday. And then Peak Six tonight talks about control of Aviva Stadium are part of their long-term relocation strategy. So Dundalk FC owners Peak Six have denied recent claims they had planned to move the club to Dublin. It would be a remarkable thing to buy Dundalk and move them to Dublin when there are loads of other clubs in Dublin that, you know, if you're wealthy and wanted to buy, you could buy or set up. Wouldn't it be a very remarkable, unusual, crazy thing to do?
It's almost as if the American owners are looking at this in a very American way.
It's true. Sport on brink of financial collapse is the Telegraph headline this morning. Fears grow. Second wave of COVID will force clubs to fold. Orient Cup tie with Spurs to be called off after positive tests. And that is it, apart from the Examiner. Hawkeye's presence in Championship 2020 hangs in balance, so we might not have Hawkeye for it. McCarthy, counties finished club action have big advantage. It's true, we knew that there was always going to be an advantage for those clubs, those inter-county teams who ran their club season off early when it came to getting a few extra training sessions in. City do enough to hold off Wolves and start the season off with a win. Egan's red card helps put Villa on the up. And Brady, a fitness concern for Burnley with bruised ribs. So Robbie Brady's bruised ribs, not good for Ireland. Anything you want to talk about there, Eoin?
We go back to the Kilcar story. We covered it pretty well there with Michael. It's just going to be interesting to see how this one develops and what necessarily happens if this thing kind of comes to the next level. The CCC in Donegal, they've obviously come out and said that this thing is going to go ahead. Kilcar have confirmed that they've had one positive COVID test, and that could be where the story ends. And I guess the HSE could say the contact tracing doesn't necessarily extend to people who train with one another, and maybe everything will be totally fine, and it will just be one isolated case. And maybe that player doesn't play, maybe that player does play. It'll just be interesting to see what happens. I know Kilcar met last night, and they've said, well, the Donegal GAA have said that the game is on because only one player has tested positive.
So ideally this game will go ahead, only one player test positive, and there were no close contacts. It's a tricky situation for everybody to be involved in. 0879 180 180 is the number, and if you want to get in touch with us, you can, because I want to tell you about this. We have a new competition that we've just launched. Just Eat have launched the Euro Football Quiz, which is going to test Irish football fans' knowledge on the European Championships, giving you the chance to win cool prizes or indeed bragging rights over your mates. You can compete nationally to win the grand prize of 4 tickets to the Euros next year in Dublin, and you can also take part in a specially created OTB Sports Mini League, for which you can win 2 tickets to the Euros in Dublin alongside Just Eat vouchers and an official Euro 2020 football. Go to justeat.ie/campaign/Euro Football Quiz. We'll tweet the link to that to sign up and test your Euros football knowledge. Also, be sure to check out our interview with David Myler and his favourite memories from the Euros as both a player and a fan, which went live on otbsports.com last week. Within that article, you'll also find the sign-up details to the OTB Football Leaderboard. We're going to take a quick break. We're back with Matt Williams.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
Ferguson has a knack for seeing maverick and, kind of creative genius and sort of letting it flow.
Team 33, the football magazine show for the football purists. The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33, live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio. Live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Into sports.
20 yards out, Ursh to shoot. Dungeon! Oh, what a goal from Fabinho! Wow!
Then get into the all-new OTB Sports app.
I think when he apologises to me, I probably will say hello to him, yeah. No.
Videos, sports news, live scores, interviews.
If Fabregas is going to come up to me in the street and give me some of the mouth that he would have given me on a football pitch, what do you do? You get a slap?
Plus, exclusive content on the OTB Podcast Network. The biggest names in sports. Ready when you are. Search OTB Sports on your app store and download it now.
It's often said about West Cork Distillers that it was built by the people, for the people, sourcing the best local ingredients, adding a little know-how and a lot of time. West Cork Distillers' award-winning whiskies and spirits are now sold in over 70 countries. Discover the taste of the finest craft whiskey and spirits at West Cork Distillers. Available in good off licenses and from westcorkdistillers.com. Drink responsibly. Visit drinkaware.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.
It's 11 minutes past 9 this morning here on OTB AM. We're turning our attention back to a humbling weekend for Irish rugby. I'm delighted to say Matt Williams is with us to give us some thoughts on it. Matt, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Joe. Very good, mate.
So, a couple of things that we wanted to talk about. There's the macro picture of Ireland teams against English teams, and then there's the micro picture of Leinster not being able to get their way out of trouble that they caused for themselves against a team who they're very familiar with because they suffered the exact same fate just 16 months ago, 14 months ago, whatever it was now, this time last year. What's your overarching thoughts on what happened?
Well, I think we've got to remember the Saracens are a very good side. I think they're the best side in Europe. I know they're relegated. I know they've done some things wrong. When they beat Leinster last year, they were the best side in Europe. And I always thought this would be an incredibly difficult game for Leinster, even before COVID. And then when COVID hit and you saw the draw, Leinster had a quarter-final, semi-final and final to contend with, while Saracens had one thing in their mind. That's to prove to the rest of the world that they're right and everyone's wrong. They're going to go to second division in England, but they're still the best team. And they're on a bit of a mission, and they're going to be hard to throw. The other part was Leinster have done 25 games straight, and before the final last week against Ulster, I kept thinking, well, is this the game they played bad? Is this the game they don't do it well? And they didn't. They played pretty well against Ulster, but they didn't play well against Saracens, and we have to say that. Saracens forced some of it, but some of it wasn't forced. Some of it was just errors from Leinster. They invited Saracens into the game, gave them such a strong lead that it was always going to be hard to throw them off. So, Leinster were brave coming back, but I think we've got to keep it a little bit in perspective about how good a team Saracens are. And you looked at the team that ran out. I know Owen Farrell wasn't there, but that forward pack was pretty immense. They exploited some poor refereeing at scrum time, and they got away with it, which I'll come back to later on because it's not what the game's about. But I don't think it's a disaster. And Leo, after the game, wasn't acting as if it was a disaster. It was hugely disappointing for everyone involved, but they were the better side on the day for sure.
What do you do when you keep getting out-muscled? Like, I think the reason that it's freaking out so many Irish rugby fans is that we've seen it against England in 2019, we saw it against England in 2020, we saw it against Saracens in 2019, we've seen it against Saracens in 2020, and this is supposed to be our best and brightest. They're the best coach team, they've got the most resources, they've got the biggest playing pool, and still, knowing what the challenge is going to be, they can't overcome it.
England are pretty good. That's hard to say. They're really doing things exceptionally smart at the top end of English rugby, not all of English rugby. The English national team has completely outthought Ireland in the last two Six Nations championships. They have been outstanding in the way they've picked Ireland apart from the first day at the Aviva 2 years ago to Twickenham last year. They literally picked Ireland apart at the seams through great thinking, fantastic play, and almost errorless play. And you have to say that Saracens have pretty much done the same. Now, let's again keep this in perspective. In the final last year that Leinster lost to Saracens, they should have won that game. There were two errors, and here's a word that would come back to, errors. Just before half-time, Luke McGrath didn't put the ball out. He should have kicked it completely into the grandstand. They get off. Leinster are well in front. And then Gary Ringrose had a 3-on-1 in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the second half and didn't pass. If they had a pass, they would have scored that try. It would be very hard. It would have been the exact same situation for Saracens with Leinster 20. I think it was a 17-point lead from memory. Don't quote me on that, but it was a significant lead if they had have done that. They didn't. Leinster have made errors, unlike Ireland. So let's put the Irish team here, the Leinster team over here. At the kickoff last week, Dev Tainer dropped the ball off the kickoff, knocked it backwards into another player and knocked it on. I can't remember the last time I saw Dev Tainer do that. How many forward passes, how many times were Leinster beaten at the breakdown? They were really invited Saracens into the game. Again, the scrummaging was bad. Let's not get onto that now. So Leinster are making errors against Saracens. It's true Saracens are forcing them into it. But Leinster aren't a million miles away. They're not getting hockeyed off the park. They got beaten. There were some things that were wrong, but they're not far off. Where the Irish national team, that's a different kettle of fish. They're picked apart. They're a million miles off it. So I don't think to all the supporters out there, we should just say we're all in this same boat. The club rugby is a lot closer than the national rugby, in my opinion, and not all's lost. And I think last week's situation for Leinster was particularly difficult. I know it was at home. I know it was COVID, but they had great opponents who had nothing to focus on but that game for 7 or 8 months. Leinster have been playing on two fronts, and it just caught up with them. But I think the national stuff is very different. That when we come out and see Ireland play against France in the next month, I know they've got Italy first, but let's just assume that they should do their business against Italy easy. Against France, this will be a very, very telling time for the national side and how their tactics will evolve and change, and they must. If they don't, when they come up against England again, they'll get belted again because they just do, the way that the national team's playing, it does not have the resources and the thinking to overcome the English. The Leinster do, but Leinster have to cut the errors out of their game that they showed last week.
Are those errors, some of them were forced by Saracens, but the ones from the kickoff, Johnny Sexton kicking the ball out from the kickoff, they're not forced, right?
No.
Is that, the word spooked was used in the aftermath by Leo Cullen. Is part of that, like, it has to be psychological. So what's causing that?
Well, I think there's a number of issues. They know that they're the one team in Europe, and I believe the one team in Europe that can beat Leinster. Whoever won that game for mine was going to win the tournament. And I think Saracens will have a challenge against Racing, but they are significantly in front of the rest. Racing at home are a difficult team, but I think Saracens will account for them, and I think they'll go all the way and win it. So the Leinster do know that when they front up against Mark McCall's team, there's a team that know how to beat them, and that's very unusual for Leinster because Leinster have 25 games straight. I don't think that's ever going to be beaten in Irish club rugby. If it does, it's going to be an unbelievably good team. But I don't believe that's going to be beaten for many, many years. They were due for a loss. But, things like the Leinster maul was going forward and they allowed Toje to get his hand on the ball and the maul collapsed. It's a turnover 5 metres out. times there in the first half where they probably had Saracens measure, and there was a bad pass. James Lowe runs into touch, like off a scrum, off tackle one, runs into touch. I mean, they're things you yell at, you would yell at a 16-year-old and say, mate, never run into touch, tackle one in a scrum, just be patient, come back infield. Now that list, I could list off maybe 10 or 15 things. I'm sure Leo could list off 20 that Leinster just made errors. Is it spooked? Well, they're a great, Leinster aren't a bunch of children. They're a highly experienced side that have won European Cups and won, obviously, their domestic competition on multiple occasions. But Saracens are a team that are negative, and they play negative really well. And I think it is something the legislators of the game have to look at this and look at the negativity of how Saracens play. Their illegal scrummaging, and I will use that term illegal, the constant box kicking, and the way that they are slowing down and using the breakdown to within an nth degree of the law. And I thought the French referee let them get away with murder at scrum time. If you look at the scrums, and if just everyone at home, if you get a chance, look at the scrums. Watch the Saracens loose head. The scrums like that, you're supposed to be loose head, hooker, tight head. The Saracens loose heads like that, which is causing the Leinster scrum to spin. And Leo hinted on it after the match. He can't come out and say what I say. But Saracens were just doing that all game. There is nothing wrong. There's nothing in the law books that says your scrum can't go backwards. And why are we penalising teams when their scrum goes backwards? The scrum's allowed to go backwards. The scrums were supposed to be a contest. They weren't a contest for the ball. They weren't supposed to determine the outcome of games through penalties. And this is a huge issue in our game where our legislators, once again, are a long way behind the game. And they have to do something about this because that game really was won and lost on scrum penalties. Leinster came back, did a really good job, but the number of points that Saracens accumulated on scrum penalties and position they got from scrum penalties turned the game. Scrums were never meant to be like that. And not only that, if we're going to stick to the laws, which I don't agree with, Saracens were doing much of the illegalities and they weren't picked up on it. You compare that to Ulster's game against Toulouse, where referee Barnes had the game, and the scrums were a completely different kettle of fish. The ball was liberated from the scrums, both backlines attacked from scrums, and the penalties were much, much less. And Barnes was having none of that shenanigans, and he refereed it well. And I think if Barnes had refereed the Leinster game, it may well have been a different outcome because Saracens wouldn't have got the leeway at the scrum that they did.
Should Irish teams, Matt, be joining the likes of Saracens in this, moving of the gap between those who are trying to bend the rules and the legislators?
Tough question, mate. The older I get, the more I think I've got to stand up for the game. Leo and Mark McCall, their job's to win that particular match, and they do it. That's a coach's job. You sit there and you say, well, when you're a coach, you sit there and say, I don't care if it's not spectacular. I don't care what people think. I just got to win. And that's the nature of the business. But when we're out here, well, I'm talking to you and I'm talking to all the people in Ireland that listen to your show, I certainly hope Ireland don't go down that path. Because, look, the English in sport, I'm not being racist here, but they play negatively in most of their sports most of the time. They're not playing their sports in a really creative manner. Now, their cricket team has changed in the last 18 months, and their cricket team's playing some really attractive cricket, which is they haven't done for 120 years. As Ian Chappell said, the only good thing England ever did for cricket or rugby was invented. Now, Eddie Jones has got that English national team playing slightly differently. I don't think, and it's not in the Irish, it's not in our nature to play that way. Irish teams, when they play well, play with creativity and they play with an expression of the national character. And Leinster has done that. So I don't think we should throw all that away on one performance. You're not going to win 26, 27, 28, 29 games in a season. You're going to have a bad day. And Leinster had a bad day. So again, we've got to keep it in proportion. But I do think we have to put pressure on the legislators of the game, those people whose job it is to look after the good of the game in the constant yin and yang between offence and defence, between the good and the bad, the negative and the positive, to keep it in balance. And right now, in many aspects of rugby, it is out of balance. it is much, much more in favour of the negative, of the destructive, than the creative and the positive. And we saw that on Saturday.
Look, it's hard to be on the other side of that, and to be on the other side of that so often over the years where, you know, you think back to Neil Back's hand against Munster, and that's part of that culture that we don't have enough of or have any of, or like what's an acceptable level of gamesmanship from Ireland where you're like, yeah, okay, I understand what you're doing there?
Well, it's hard to say. I've got great respect for Neil Back. He was a wonderful player. I coached against him for many years. He is sensational. His reputation will be forever tarnished by what he did that day. And I would have money. I've never asked him this question. I think if he had his time over again, he would definitely not do that. And I've heard some of his former teammates say that to me, but Neil's never said it, so I can't put words in his mouth. I mean, how would we feel if someone went out and played like that? I mean, it's just not. It's not the way the game's meant to be played. So you don't drop down. It's like we're saying here, and okay, people are stealing off each other. You say to the kid, okay, well, it's okay to steal because he's stealing off me. It's not okay to steal. And especially in a game of rugby, the game of rugby is about teaching young people about doing the right thing, respecting authority, sticking to a plan, and respecting the game. Now, what Neil Back did, that was the opposite of that. What a terrible example that is to all the kids out there. We're really fortunate that our Irish rugby players are really great role models. Now, we lost the game on Saturday, but we didn't see them bashing each other or punching or doing anything wrong. We didn't see them carry on like pork chops afterwards. They showed great humility, congratulated each other. No one better than Leo Cullen at that. Johnny Sexton's a great, great competitor, but he went into it. I don't think we should go to the lowest common denominator, and I don't think we have to. And again, let's keep this in proportion. The negativity on the scrum. The scrums have always been negative. Props are cheats. They're all born cheats, every one of them. They just cheated better than the others. And I thought it was very bad refereeing. So you're always going to get that. But we have to think of a way where we don't invite English teams into the game, where they can just box kick, turn you around, play negative rugby. And even then, Leinster almost got back in. But I very much argue against going to the dark side. Stay in the light. Keep fighting the good fight. It'll come. You're not going to win the European Cup every year. I know in Ireland I say this to people all the time. They go, oh, but we love winning it. I know. Everyone loves winning it, but you just can't. And some days you get beaten by a better team. Now, I didn't agree with Saracens' tactics, but they were the better team on the day because Leinster made too many unforced errors. And let me, my old dad used to always say, in big games, the teams that make the least mistakes win. Now, there's a lot of other things happen in big games, but it's not a bad rule of thumb. And Leinster made too many errors when they had the ball in hand and in defence. That first try by Goob, it was a great offload, but that's just a missed tackle off a set piece. You should never let in a try off set piece. So there's a whole lot of factors that went into that loss, not just the negative view of the way the game is being played at the top end of English rugby.
Saracens are a really good team. They do have somebody in Elliot Daly who can nail you from 60-odd metres, and they can actually beat you in loads of different ways. So the scrum penalties is just a very interesting issue. I mean, we probably did speak about it in the aftermath of the World Cup final. The game was a bit ruined by the fact that the scrums were so one-sided, and actually, it's not a great spectacle. I'm not a neutral observer at the weekend. I'm born in Kildare. I've been a Leinster fan all my life, and so therefore watching that's very hard. But as you come back, the pain begins to fade, and you're like, actually, this is not a great game to watch if that's how one team is going to just beat the other in the scrums. And maybe that's sour grapes. Maybe it is just sour grapes. But certainly, I think you're right that there needs to be a consideration, at least, of how these rules are allowing one team to win big games.
You and I are talking about that. 100% right. It wasn't a great game to watch. Now, if you go and watch a game I went out to, my first live rugby game in 6 months, I went out and watched the Waratahs play the Melbourne Rebels at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And mate, I wrote an article about it in the Irish Times. I think there was 86 stoppages in the game. Scrums were taking 3 minutes to get set. And then there were penalties. There were resets from it. What is occurring in the game is not good. There is not a lot of entertainment. Now, there were some great games over the weekend around the world. So I watched Canterbury against Waikato. And look, go and watch that. It was just sensational. You know what the way that game down in Canterbury for the Ranfurly Shield. It was brilliant. The final of Australian rugby between Queensland and the Brumbies was a great game of rugby. But in every single game, the scrums are a blight. Scrums were never meant to be like this. Now, if you go and dig up a few old fossils like me, Fergus Slattery and some of the guys playing back in the 80s, this happened in the 80s. And what happened, the laws came out and said there will be no penalties from scrums because scrums were determining outcomes of games. And referees were getting it wrong in the 70s and 80s. So instead of getting a long arm where you can kick 3 points, they gave you a bent arm. So you could only tap the ball and run with it. You couldn't kick it goal. So if there was something wrong in the scrum, it didn't cost you the game. And what happened was people started scoring tries from scrums. They started running the ball from scrums because they couldn't scrummage for the penalty. That has to come back. We have to speed up the engagement of scrums. Look, at the game I watched, I think there were 14 scrums. Now, 14 times 3 minutes. Now, not all of them were 3 minutes, but that's more than half the game. We're sitting around doing nothing, waiting for the scrums to get organised. I mean, it's a blight on our game, as are the interpretations from the referees about the breakdown. So many times Leinster had the ball, and there was no way Maro Toji, who's a wonderful player, by the way, I'm not complaining about him, he's a very smart player, wonderful player, possibly captain of the Lions. He could just he's got his giant arm through, put his hand on the ball. He had no intention of picking that ball up, but he had his hand on the ball. Laws say, you got your hand on the ball, you're entitled to it. It's a penalty within 2 seconds. You know, like, that's not what the game is meant to be. The game was meant to be a contest. That's not contesting the ball. That's getting your hand on the ball. So there's so many aspects where our legislators in world rugby are miles behind and years behind. The World Cup final was a blight, as was the interpretation of the high tackle at the World Cup. Again, no one complained about the policy of the high tackle. No, the high tackle should be gone. But they brought it out at the World Cup. I mean, how dumb is that? To do it at your greatest, where the most people around the world are watching your game, and you bring out an interpretation of the law that no one has ever seen. So the way the laws are being conducted in rugby, the way the legislation is being put together, and the way it's being interpreted by our referees is without doubt the biggest issue in the game, and it has been for many years. And I'm not popular at World Rugby because I've been saying this for many years. When I coached Ulster, we had some disastrous refereeing because of interpretations of the breakdown. And the coaching is a mile in front. So Mark McCall outthought all the legislators and all the referees. So that has to catch up. It's like the internet. The internet's a mile ahead of the parliaments. The coaching and the implementation on the game is a mile ahead of rugby's parliament. And rugby's parliament has to catch up.
Matt, what you're saying is very interesting this morning. One other factor that perhaps maybe we haven't discussed enough over the last 2 years since that fairly humbling day against England at the start of 2019. Are English rugby, English clubs, and the players that they have, are they simply just much better than Irish players? Like when you talk about depth, when you talk about the once-in-a-generation players like Maro Itoje, as you mentioned there, are they simply just a far better player group? And with all the talent that they have, we actually have to overachieve to hope for parity consistently?
No. I mean, England's got more rugby players than any country in the world. They've got a phenomenal competition, but it is littered with foreigners. They have a lot more foreigners playing. And like one of my great mentors said to me once when we were at a conference, New Zealand were bragging at this conference that their top 3 teams could beat any of the top Australian side. The one on the top Australian side, they could pick 3 teams and their thirds would beat them. And Brian O'Shea, Box O'Shea, just gently looked at him and said, "Matty, the mongrels can only put 15 on the field at one time. Don't worry." Now, England have got great depth, but they can only put 15 out at one time. So they'll always have more depth than Ireland. They'll have more depth than Australia, more depth than just about anyone in the world. But Ireland has an exceptionally good system. And again, we've got to keep this in perspective. Ireland won a Grand Slam against a very good England side, coached by the same guy on St Patrick's Day 2018. Now, since then, England's tactics have been phenomenal, and Ireland's have gone backwards. And we have to just call a spade a spade. And I've been saying this for some time, maybe very unpopular, and I don't know why, because I've been proved to be right. I'm not trying to shoot anyone or anything. I'm just telling the truth. From that day, from that high point and beating New Zealand, Ireland's play has been picked. It's been absolutely picked apart like a seamstress taking a shirt apart at the seams. And the world knows how to beat Ireland. And until Ireland's tactics grow and change, their formations change, and they put some doubt in people's minds that they can't do it, England will continue to beat Ireland. But that's got nothing to do with their system being better or so on. They've got some great players at the moment, just as we had. We had O'Driscoll and Paul O'Connell. They're generational players. We've still got some great players, and many of those players beat England 2 years ago for a Grand Slam at Twickenham. But England's tactics have just ripped Ireland apart. And I've got to say this, Ireland hasn't adapted, hasn't changed, hasn't moved forward. Leinster has. Leinster have been beaten by the best side in Europe twice. But so have Ireland at the national level. But Leinster haven't been picked apart. They've been beaten. But Ireland at Twickenham last year, mate, that was bad. Ireland at the Aviva the year before, that was bad. So there's a huge, huge challenge for the national team. There's still a big challenge for Leinster and Munster, of course, and the rest of Irish rugby. But Leinster are the second best team in Europe. I don't know that Ireland are the second best national team in Europe. They're certainly not the second best national team in the world. Leinster will go toe-to-toe with the Canterbury Crusaders or whoever you go in world rugby. They'll go toe-to-toe with. But I don't think the national team, using the tactics we last saw, will do that. So the national team has a very, very long thinking process, planning process, and change that it has to go through. And it is a big challenge, not a small challenge. It is a big challenge.
Are we being outthought?
Yes, 100%. Now, you've got two regimes that went in. Joe was outthinking everyone, and then Joe Schmidt. Everyone thinks because I criticised Joe Schmidt at the end that I didn't respect him or didn't like him. The exact opposite. He was unbelievable with Leinster. He was incredible with the national side, what he achieved, and their performances against New Zealand. That culminating that night at the Aviva against New Zealand was just staggering. And I came out and said Ireland can win the World Cup. I said it in the paper. I said it on your show. I said it everywhere. I thought Ireland could win the World Cup after that. They were great, and they regressed. They got much more conservative, and they became predictable. Now, in rugby and coaching, if you can predict what your opposition is going to do, you can stop it. And that's what occurred. Ireland started to get predictable. Now, poor old Farrell comes in, he's only got a few games, but they hadn't evolved, they hadn't moved on. Now, it's a tough question to ask them to move on and change so much, but we didn't see a lot of change. They were playing the same sort of Joe Schmidt game. Now, Farrell was put in as a coach to continue on Joe's legacy. The problem was Joe's legacy at the end wasn't a good legacy. It obviously needed radical overhaul. And the way England changed, if you compare the way England changed from how they played on St Patrick's Day at Twickenham to the way they played against New Zealand in the World Cup semi-final, England's tactics and thoughts had changed radically. And again, England's tactics from the Aviva in the Six Nations when they beat Ireland to their tactics at Twickenham last year, again had evolved and changed. And definitely, Ireland had been outthought across the park in almost every area. And that is worrying, and it's something that we're going to have to keep a close eye on over this autumn internationals and obviously the Six Nations coming up. Because we'll need to see progression. We need to see change and growth in the way the team plays.
Last question for you then. Is the Pro 14 an issue? Is the quality of the Pro 14 an issue when the Irish teams go into Europe? Or is that a little bit of a red herring at the moment?
Look, there's a yes and no to this. If we don't respect our own competition, no one else is. It's like self-esteem. If you don't respect yourself, no one else is going to respect you. So you've got to we got to stop talking the Pro 14 down. We got to, and I know it's not at the same standard as top 14 in France and the English Premiership. However, I live in France most of the year, and I can tell you the top 14, a lot of those games aren't worth watching either. So, I've just watched Rugby Australia, Super Rugby Australia, and there were a lot of games there that weren't worth watching either. So I don't think we're always very hard on ourselves, and I think we shouldn't be. I think we've got to cherish that competition, and we've got to improve it. We've got to think of ways where we put more on it. The problem is Ireland has this incredible love affair with the Heineken Cup, and so your year's a failure if you don't make the Heineken Cup final or win it. And I don't believe that's the case. It's like I said on your show a couple of weeks ago, making a semi-final for Munster isn't a failure. They haven't been greatly successful. We're still not a failure. There is lots of thinking to do with the Pro 14, but teams not putting their best teams out in enough matches, that is a problem. But because Irish teams don't put their best teams out in the rest of them, that's why they're doing so well in Europe. So you sort of got this dichotomy. Now, we also have to remember that we've got Ulster made the quarterfinals, Leinster made the quarterfinals, Leinster made the final last year, Munster made the semis last year. So Ireland are punching above their weight as far as their numbers in their country goes. They're still performing. This year hasn't been a great year. That's always going to be the case. I think not every year you're going to come home with the shield. Let me say, I think Irish rugby is in a very healthy state. I think the development of the age group teams, where we saw the 20s doing so well for the last few years, moving through, the provinces doing pretty well. They're not basket cases in any way. They're moving up. They're highly competitive. And the national team's thinking has to change for sure. But Irish rugby is still pretty healthy. It's not disastrous. And I don't think we should all lose heart from those results on the weekend. It's a bad weekend, but, the boys will go away, wipe their noses, clean up the cuts, come out and be fighting again in a few weeks. And, Irish teams will play well. And I hope they play positive rugby and they stick with that mindset that has got them to where they are. And they have to keep growing and changing. Don't give in to the dark side.
You've been therapy for the very disappointed Leinster and, by extension, the Ireland rugby fans this morning. Matt, great to have you with us. Thanks a million.
Lovely to talk to you both. Have a great day, guys.
That's our resident Dr. Jennifer Melfi there, giving us some thoughts about what happened at the weekend. Going to talk Premier League in just a moment, but first we want to tell you about a new podcast from 20 by 20. Choose What's Next focuses on where women's sport goes from here. It's available on 20by20.ie and is well worth your time. It is not quite time for Deal or No Deal. We're going to talk about Manchester City against Wolves first, because Phil Egan is here with us this morning. Phil, how are you?
How you doing? How are you getting
on? Man City good at football. Who knew?
Yeah, very similar to what we saw from them last season. Spells in the game where they just looked so superior to their opposition. But then in the second half, there was about a 20-minute spell where Wolves had them on the rack and had chances, didn't put them away. Eventually, Jimenez scores and sets up that grandstand finish. And you think back to last season, a lot of the goals Wolves scored in that double that they did over City came in the last 10 minutes, but they couldn't find the equaliser, and obviously Jesus wraps it up in injury time. But yeah, in terms of the team selection, Ake obviously got his debut. Him and Stones played centre half, and Mendy played left back. Mendy will give you something going forward, but I think we saw in the game last season that gave Liverpool the secure the title the night that City lost to Chelsea. Mendy, Guardiola just doesn't trust him in big games. Wouldn't be surprised later in the season if you see Ake playing as the left back, especially in those big games, maybe those big European games.
Is he good enough? Yeah.
Well, he's played there for the Dutch national team, and we've seen Guardiola do this before, where I think back to when they played Liverpool in the Champions League, he started Laporte at left back, and it's something that we know that Guardiola, for these big games, some people accuse him of overthinking things and maybe kind of going away from what they do so well. But Ake is definitely an option there. Well, Laporte comes back in. Is he going to play Ake and Laporte as his two centre halves? There's still talk of them trying to get another centre half in, whether it's Koulibaly, we don't know. But obviously, look, De Bruyne was brilliant again yesterday. He won the penalty. He pulled the strings. Phil Foden looked very good. Jesus, as good as he is, just isn't Sergio Aguero in terms of finishing. He is very much a different player, and Sterling was lively as well. And just he played Fernandinho and Rodri as holding players. Now, I don't know if Gundogan would have started. Obviously, he tested positive for COVID-19, so that took him out of the selection. And yeah, like I said, they were very sharp in the first half. Wolves were poor in the first half. Obviously, he played Adama Traore in the Matt Doherty role in a 3-4-3, whereas when Doherty was in the team, obviously we know he's gone now. There's talk of Semedo coming in from Barcelona, which would be good signing for Wolves, and he'd obviously go into that role, and then that means you can play Traore further up the pitch, because Traore did the damage against City last season. Now, sometimes what they did was they would play a 3-5-2, and it was Traore with Jimenez, but Traore would just wander around the pitch, and basically Wolves sit in their defensive shape. As soon as they get the ball, they look for Traore. And when he gets on it, then obviously we know the damage he can do, but he just didn't get that opportunity to do it as much, especially in the first half. It was actually him that gave away the ball that led to the Phil Foden goal. So, yeah, City are going to be brilliant at times, but definitely watching that game last night, if you were a Liverpool fan, you would have been thinking they still have those issues to sort out at the back, where if they're not holding onto the ball, they can be got at, and they just don't convince you at the back.
Is it a very similar fix to Liverpool? Because I think on the evidence of Sunday, if Joe Gomez or you don't want to ever hope this happens from a Liverpool perspective, but if Virgil van Dijk ever gets injured this season, then Fabinho is your backup there. It seems pretty clear from that he was so good on Sunday. Is Fernandinho at centre half a better option than John Stones, essentially, if Laporte's absence is prolonged?
Yeah, I think so. But the problem then, if you take Fernandinho out of midfield, then you lose something in midfield, and you lose that protective shield. And Rodri is an excellent player, but Fernandinho, even though he's 35, he knows how to play that role a lot better, and he's quite clever as well. Sometimes he can take that yellow card when a team is breaking, and actually sometimes he doesn't even get the yellow card. He could commit 2 or 3 fouls before he picks up the yellow card, and then obviously he's walking the line where he's one more foul away from getting sent off. So that's something we saw last season, where Fernandinho came in, played centre half, but you kind of lose something in midfield. But Guardiola often asked Fernandinho to drop in between the two centre halves as well to give them that protection. But it was interesting that he played 2 holding midfielders. I don't know what selection he would have gone with if Gundogan was available. Obviously, Gundogan played 49 games in all competition last season, so he's a player that Guardiola tends to pick. So does Fernandinho, Rodri both start if he has his full squad available? I'm not sure. But yeah, John Stones, it was interesting. There was a few times where he just lumped the ball down. He didn't take any chances, and maybe he's been told just to go back to basics and don't get caught in the ball. But it would appear that it doesn't look like John Stones has a long-term future at Manchester City. We've obviously seen things can change quickly in football, but he's been given plenty of opportunities and he hasn't exactly excelled, has he?
No, not exactly. Can we get your take on Thiago from Sunday, Phil? Because obviously we had Kenny in with us yesterday.
Is he on? Did he say something about Thiago?
I still scratch my head a little bit at the signing. Their squad is strengthened by Thiago's arrival, but for me, they've spent 30 million on a third choice number 6. I think he's inferior to Fabinho and Jordan Henderson in that role. That's why I'm surprised they brought him in. Thiago's an experienced player, a good technician, and we saw a bit of that yesterday. But what we also saw were defensive deficiencies. We saw the number of missed tackles. We saw the penalty giveaway. He is weak defensively.
Yeah, it was 45 minutes of football, his first game.
He's not basing that on 45 minutes of football. Yeah. He says he's watched him at Barcelona and he's watched him at Bayern Munich, in fairness. So, he's not overreacting to the 45 minutes we did say.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But the thing about the role Thiago played when he came on, and the role that he could play in the season, is, if he's playing that deep line midfield role, he's basically there as a creator. And he mightn't give you the same protection that Fabinho or Henderson do, but he gives you a different option. And he is brought in. One thing watching him the other day when he came on was, with so many of the Liverpool players, we know what they're about, we know how they play, whereas there's that bit of unpredictability with Thiago, where we know that Liverpool's most creative players are their fullbacks, who obviously essentially play as wing backs. So teams have copped onto this where they're trying to stop them. So Thiago now gives you a different option, where opposition teams have to look at how can we stop him? He can play that ball in behind defence. He can split that, low block. And yeah, maybe he's not as good in terms of his defensive abilities, but he's certainly better than Henderson and Fabinho in terms of the way he passes the ball about. So I don't know. I think you have to look at what he brings rather than what he doesn't bring. That's why Liverpool have signed him. And
sure, he's breaking records, Phil.
Yeah, I wouldn't really worry too much about that.
Was what Kenny said that controversial?
Well, I know Kenny obviously made comments last season about Fabinho and Jordan Henderson, and he feels Henderson is more dynamic in that role. And I mean, that pretty much worked out when Fabinho went out of the team. Henderson came in and played that 6 role, and he played it really well. So I don't think it's an issue that...
Why are the Liverpool fans losing it? That's what I'm asking you.
I think the fact is you've brought this guy. If you watch the Champions League final, he was the best player on the pitch, and Liverpool have signed them for just over 20 million. And given the way the fixtures are going to come thick and fast, I think that the midfield is going to be the one area that feel Liverpool are going to change the most. So it's not about who's first choice, because he's going to change his midfield a lot this season, Jurgen Klopp. So Thiago...
Liverpool fans are being touchy, is what you're saying, Phil. That's what I'm getting off you there. It's like they're overreacting a little bit because Kenny's pointed something out that may or may not...
I don't know, like, is the issue here not to do with, like, what Kenny said about him defensively? Is it not just being picked up on one little moment where he gave away a penalty?
No, he said it's based over years of watching him.
Yeah, but obviously the reason to be talking about the defensive frailty was as a result of giving away the penalty.
He literally said it 10 minutes before that in commentary, this guy's not a good tackler. And then 10 minutes later he gives away a penalty. He goes, look, I mean, you're going to have to get used to this.
Yeah, but Liverpool did not sign Thiago for tackling. They didn't sign him and go, he's going to be this combative midfielder. He is the conductor of the orchestra. So he's the guy that doesn't give the ball away. Liverpool, as good as they've been, their midfield, the function is to get the ball back as quick as you can, get on the attack. Whereas now they have a guy that can control the tempo of a game. He can sit in front of the back four, demand the ball in tight spaces, bring other players into the game. And if he isn't as good at tackling as Henderson and Fabinho, I don't think Jurgen Klopp's going to lose any sleep or say, right, Thiago, you're going to have to stay back after training. We're going to learn how to tackle. He's perfectly capable of tackling. He likes to put the foot in, but he was not signed for being a defensive shield. He is signed to play in a deep line midfield role, to start attacks. People might point out that he doesn't have high numbers in terms of assists the way, say, somebody like Kevin De Bruyne does. But I don't really read too much into that, because if Thiago splits a defence for Trent Alexander-Arnold or Andy Robertson to put in the cross, Robertson or Alexander-Arnold get the assist in terms of the stats. But who put the killer ball in? It was Thiago. I think Liverpool have just signed this. A lot of Liverpool fans are just excited about the fact that they've signed a player that's the finished article. Whereas under Klopp, what he has done is he has signed players with serious potential. Obviously, Klopp is such a good coach that he gets the best out of them. But here he has a player that's the finished article. You bring him into a league-winning team and you're trying to just sprinkle a little bit more magic dust on what is already a winning team that can now try and retain their Premier League title and try and win back their Champions League title as well.
OK, time for deal or no deal.
I signed for them after the Euros, and after my first day's training I was driving home, I was actually thinking, regretting it, what have I done? Like I walked into a circus.
It's amazing, isn't it? Liverpool and Real Madrid will both try to sign France striker Kylian Mbappe from Paris Saint-Germain next summer. Pretty fanciful and far off next summer, obviously. But is this where Liverpool are headed? Will they become a destination for the world's very best player?
No. I think he's going to end up at Real Madrid. He wants, like, he's always talked about Real Madrid as his dream move, and he's flirted with Liverpool and he said nice things about them, and he's been asked about Jurgen Klopp, and yeah, great manager, and he did an interview earlier in the year. At the time, Liverpool were unbeaten in the league, and he said they're so impressive, they're a machine, they just keep winning. Obviously, Mbappe has played against Liverpool as well. He's scored at Anfield. He's played at Anfield. He knows what it's all about. But in terms of the way you'd have to finance this deal, Liverpool missed out on Timo Werner because they couldn't match the finances of Chelsea in terms of how Chelsea had more cash up front. Liverpool are after signing a couple of players now where they give a little bit of money and obviously it's paid in instalments, which is usually the way transfers work. But obviously the more cash you can offer a club up front, that puts you in a stronger position. And I'd imagine if PSG are going to lose Kylian Mbappe, they would want as much cash up front. Now, next summer he's only going to have a year left in his contract. It doesn't look like he's going to sign the new deal with PSG.
No. Very interesting. You should be mortgaging the house to try and get Mbappe. Right, Crystal Palace have angrily denied making a £25 million offer for Liverpool and England under-21 striker Rhian Brewster, who's only 20. Why don't Liverpool just loan him out?
Because if they sell him, they obviously get money. And if he's really good, there'll be a buyback clause. I would imagine they would put a buyback clause or first refusal in the contract. So if he is really all that, they'll get to see him in the Premier League and they'll say, right, you know what? He's proved us.
So they want the money and they also want the opportunity to buy him back.
Yeah.
As opposed to just loaning him out.
If they loan him out and he doesn't really work out, there's nobody coming in looking for him next summer, then they won't get cash for him. But this is a guy that hasn't played in the Premier League and they could be getting more than 20 million for him. And he needs to get out, I think. He needs to play first team football. He's 20. He's looking at his former teammates, the likes of Phil Foden and Jadon Sancho, who are on that under-17 World Cup winning team with England, who Jadon Sancho is a superstar now. Obviously, Phil Foden is now starting games for Manchester City. And Brewster was a star on that team. He won the Golden Boot in that tournament. He was meant to be the next big thing. He just has. How do you break into the front three of Liverpool? It's just so difficult. So if he was to go somewhere like Crystal Palace, I know Sheffield United have been mentioned, but they were more looking at a loan deal. Whereas if Palace, I know the chairman Steve Parish has said he kind of rubbished those reports that were on Sky yesterday. But if Palace are willing to pay money, then Liverpool are going to take it. OK,
to Manchester United, there's a series of names here that they have been linked with, are close to, or inquired about. Porto left-back Alex Telles, hopeful of sealing a move to Manchester United, but the clubs have yet to agree a fee. There's also been a shift in United's intent after the defeat to Crystal Palace, as in they realise that they really need him. Also interested in RB Leipzig and France defender Upamecano. We've heard this consistently. The money might be too much at the moment, but maybe it's time to panic. And also, apparently, over the summer, they made an inquiry for Dominic Calvert-Lewin, but they were put off by the 80 million valuation, which, looks cheap after any man who can score a goal with his shoulder/back. I mean, how do you mark that? I don't know. Are Manchester United primed to do some panic buying? Any of these going to arrive, Phil?
I think Telles looks like it could get done. I've thought for a couple of seasons that United do need a left-back, and a left-back that can get up and down. That's what you need in the modern game. And they have obviously Wan-Bissaka on the other side of the pitch, who the strength of his game is defending. So, you need at least one left-back that's going to be able to get up and down and give you that outlet, because what we saw the other day against Crystal Palace again is a well-organised team that sits deep. United struggle to break them down. And this is what Bruno Fernandes was brought in for, but Palace were so well organised. We know Roy Hodgson drills his team in terms of the training and how they have to sit in. But Luke Shaw's injury record, he's just not going to get up and down that pitch the way you want. If you look at the best left-backs in world football, I'm not saying Alex Telles is the best left-back in world football, but he certainly would be an upgrade there, and a guy that has an eye for a goal, does take penalties if Bruno's ever off the pitch, but he also sets up goals as well, and that's something Luke Shaw hasn't really got in his game. And as I said, with the injury record, the problem with United obviously is we've been talking about this all summer about getting deals done. They haven't done it, and they had an extra week. You would have thought that if they could hit the ground running and look fresh, but they looked anything but. And we know at United, just the size of the club, one bad result and things just change. Just everything becomes so negative. Saying that though, when you expect, I think back to the Burnley game last season when they lost at Old Trafford, they had just lost to Liverpool at Anfield. I don't think many people thought Solskjaer would see the season out.
No,
and then
he turned it around.
They went unbeaten. They finished third, and you think, right, he's done his bit. He's got you back into the Champions League now. You got to back him, and they haven't.
No, they haven't. Not properly. Let's talk a little bit about Wilfried Zaha, who this time 3 weeks ago, I suspect you would have been able to get at a bargain price because people kind of thought his moment had come and gone, and then all of a sudden he burst into this season. And now Roy Hodgson is saying it will be hard for the club to keep him if a big money bid comes in. Wink, wink, nods. Come on, everybody, come on. How much money? Roll up, roll up. The Wilfried Zaha stakes are open. Should any Premier League club be taking a serious look at him now, and who?
I think a lot of clubs would love to have him, but I just think they're going to get priced out of it. Very similar to the way Jack Grealish was at Aston Villa, where I know he's since signed his new contract, but it was just going to be a lot of money for somebody to fork out. And Zaha started the season so well. Obviously he got the winner against Southampton, scored 2 goals against United. And you look at the signing of Eze, they got the young lad they got in from QPR, and you wondered, was this guy being brought in maybe with a view to replacing Zaha? But if you actually have him in the same team as Zaha, do we start seeing the best of Zaha again? Because a lot of teams when they play Palace, they just double up on Zaha. Whereas I feel if he goes to a bigger club and there's obviously better players around him, he'll get more space. So Arsenal was a club that he was always linked with, but now Arsenal look like they're actually pretty well set in attack. And we know that, well, we hear that they don't have money yet. They always seem to find money, but they do their deals in that way. I was speaking about earlier about instalments, that they don't necessarily have to front up the cash. But
back to United?
Well, I don't. I think United's priority. We talked about a left back there. United need a centre back, and they could certainly do with one more attacking player. But maybe Zaha doesn't want to go back to United.
Okay, so no deal for Zaha. He's going to be a Crystal Palace player at the end of the transfer window.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, that's your deal or no deal for today. Thanks, Phil.
I signed for them after the Euros, and after my first day's training, I was driving home. I was actually thinking, regretting it. What have I done? Like I walked into a circus. It's amazing, isn't it?
OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. If you don't have the OTB Sports app already, then get it in the App Store. We're at 10:01 here this morning. And what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio today, Keith Andrews meets Philly McMahon, 1 o'clock. Dadcast from 3. Matt Rushmore is Roscommon today at 4. OTB Gold is Cora Staunton in conversation with Nathan Murphy at 6. And we're back on air and online from 7 o'clock with Off the Ball on News Talk tonight. OTB AM is live from 7:30 tomorrow morning. We'll see you then. Best of luck.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, we don't just play the game, we change it. Gillette, made of what matters.